The brutal Montana blizzard howled like a demon outside the cabin walls, but the real nightmare stood inside. A scarred outlaw with a knife dripping blood onto the wooden floor, blocking her only escape. Evelyn Harrow, the unwanted daughter once mocked as worthless by Charleston society, now faced a choice that would define everything. Die like the frightened ghost she used to be, or fight like the woman the wilderness had forged her into. What happened next would stain the snow red and prove that survival doesn't belong to the beautiful. It belongs to the ruthless. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The grandfather clock in the Harrow Mansion's entrance hall struck 8 times, each chime echoing through marble corridors like a death knell. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall outside her father's study, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Inside that room, her entire future was being decided without her knowledge, without her consent, and absolutely without her presence mattering one damn bit. The girl is unmarriageable. Her father's voice carried the same cold disgust he'd used discussing a failed business venture. 24 years old, built like a farmhand, and that face so covered in freckles like some common Irish washerwoman. Evelyn's fingers dug into the wallpaper. She'd heard worse, much worse. But hearing it said so casually, like stating the color of the drapes, still carved fresh wounds every time. Then send her away, father. That was Clarissa, her younger sister. 21, petite, blonde, and beautiful enough to have 3 marriage proposals waiting. I can't host my engagement party with her lurking around like some tragic spinster from a Gothic novel. The Vanderbilts are coming. The Astors. Can you imagine? Where exactly would I send her? Their father, Marcus Harrow, sounded genuinely curious, as if the problem presented an interesting puzzle rather than his eldest daughter's entire existence. There are institutions. I'm not paying for an asylum when she's not actually insane. Just unfortunate. Evelyn closed her eyes. The word unfortunate was generous. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, and Marcus Harrow had never forgiven her for it. The fact that Evelyn had grown tall, 5'10" by age 16, with broad shoulders, strong hands, and a face that burned and freckled in the sun, instead of achieving that porcelain perfection society demanded, only deepened his resentment. There was an advertisement in last month's Gazette, Clarissa said, her voice taking on that particular sing-song quality that meant she was plotting something cruel. Some mountain man out in Montana territory looking for a wife. The ad specifically requested someone strong enough to survive the frontier. Silence. Then Marcus laughed. An actual laugh, something Evelyn heard so rarely she almost didn't recognize it. You can't be serious. Why not? She's strong. Nobody can argue that. Remember when she lifted that entire bookshelf by herself during the library renovation? Even the workmen were impressed. She lifted it because you told her your cat was trapped underneath, Marcus said dryly. There was no cat. Obviously. More silence. Evelyn could picture her father steepling his fingers, the way he did when considering a particularly ruthless business decision. This mountain man, he said slowly. What's his name? Caleb Boone. He's some kind of legendary frontiersman. The advertisement said he's been surviving alone in the wilderness for 6 years. It also said, Clarissa paused for effect, that he's looking for a woman who won't break under hard conditions, who can work, who won't complain about rough living. And you think, I think it would be hilarious, Clarissa's voice turned sharp and gleeful. Can you imagine? Our Evelyn, who's afraid of horses, sent off to marry some savage mountain man in the middle of nowhere? She'd probably die of fright before even reaching Montana. Clarissa. Oh, don't pretend to care, father. You've been trying to figure out what to do with her for years. This solves everything. She'd be gone, permanently. And we could tell society she married and moved west. Tragic, but respectable. Better than the truth. The truth. Evelyn knew exactly what truth her sister meant. The truth that no man in Charleston, or anywhere in the civilized East, would ever want her. The truth that she was a burden, an embarrassment, a living reminder of Marcus Harrow's dead wife and failed paternal obligations. I won't force her, Marcus said finally, but Evelyn heard the calculation in his voice. But if she were to answer the advertisement herself, she'd never do that. She barely leaves the house. Then perhaps we help her find her courage. They were still talking when Evelyn pushed away from the wall and walked silently up the stairs to her bedroom. Her hands shook as she closed the door and locked it. Not that locks had ever kept Clarissa out when she wanted to torment her older sister. The room was large but sparse. Evelyn had learned young not to keep things she cared about where they could be destroyed. Her books were hidden in the attic. Her few precious possessions, her mother's locket, a rock collection from childhood, letters from the one aunt who'd ever shown her kindness before dying of influenza, were locked in a trunk under her bed. She walked to the window and looked out at Charleston's gas-lit streets. Beautiful, civilized, and absolutely suffocating. The thing was, Evelyn wasn't entirely sheltered. She'd spent years in her father's library, reading everything he'd dismissed as unsuitable for young ladies. Geological surveys, agricultural reports, books about Western expansion, mining operations, frontier survival. She'd educated herself because nobody else would bother, and because books didn't judge her for being tall or strong or covered in freckles. She knew what Montana Territory actually meant. Brutal winters, complete isolation, grizzly bears, mountain lions, wolves, outlaws, and men who'd gone half feral from living alone too long. She also knew what staying in Charleston meant. More years of being invisible, except when she was useful. More dinner parties where she was seated at the end of the table, silent and ignored. More of Clarissa's casual cruelties. More of her father's cold disappointment every time he looked at her. At least in Montana, she'd be worth something, even if only as labor. The thought terrified her. It also felt like the only honest option she'd ever had. 3 weeks later, Evelyn stood on the train platform with a single trunk containing everything she owned, wearing a heavy wool coat she'd never needed in Charleston's mild climate, and trying very hard not to vomit from sheer terror. The train whistle shrieked, steam billowed across the platform. Around her, families said tearful goodbyes. Young couples held hands. Children bounced with excitement at the adventure ahead. Evelyn stood alone. Marcus hadn't even come to the station. He'd said his goodbyes in his study that morning, a brief handshake and a check for $50, which was simultaneously generous and insulting. $50 to start a completely new life in a territory so wild it barely counted as America. Clarissa had come. Of course Clarissa had come. Here, her sister pressed something into Evelyn's hand. For your journey. It was a letter, sealed with wax. Evelyn recognized her own handwriting on the envelope, or rather, a skillful forgery of it. The address read, Mr. Caleb Boone, Black Ridge, Montana Territory. What is this? Your correspondence with your future husband, silly. Don't you remember writing to him? Clarissa's smile was poison sweet. You were so eloquent about your desire to escape civilization and embrace frontier life. Evelyn's stomach dropped. What did you— Oh, nothing terrible. Just answered his advertisement in your name, described you accurately. Tall, strong, hardworking. He seemed quite pleased. That's his response you're holding. You had no right. I had every right. Father gave permission. Clarissa leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only Evelyn could hear. You're going to get on this train, sister dear. You're going to travel across this entire country. And you're going to marry a man who thinks you actually want to be his frontier wife. And if you try to run, if you try to come back, Father will disown you completely. No money, no home, nothing. He wouldn't— He would. We discussed it. This is your chance to actually be useful for once instead of just taking up space and ruining the view. The train whistle blew again. Final boarding call. Clarissa stepped back, her smile widening. Do try not to die immediately. I want this story to last at least a few months before we have to pretend to mourn you. She turned and walked away, her expensive skirt swishing, already laughing with friends who'd come to watch the spectacle of pathetic Evelyn Harrow being shipped west like unwanted furniture. Evelyn looked down at the letter in her shaking hands. She should refuse. She should march right back to the mansion and demand to speak with her father, and what? He'd already made his decision. Clarissa had made sure of that. The conductor called out, last chance. Evelyn picked up her trunk, easily, the weight barely registering, and climbed aboard the train. The journey west took 17 days and felt like 17 years. Evelyn spent the first week in a daze, reading and rereading Caleb Boone's letter. His handwriting was rough but clear. The message itself was not what she'd expected. Miss Harrow, your letter reached me after considerable delay as mail to Black Ridge is irregular at best. I appreciate your honesty about your situation and your willingness to consider frontier life despite its hardships. I won't lie to you, this country is brutal. Winters drop to 30 below. The nearest settlement is a 3-day ride. Grizzlies come down from the high country every fall. I've lost 2 fingers to frostbite and carry more scars than I can count. But if you're strong like you say and willing to work, we'll manage. I'm not looking for a fine lady. I'm looking for a partner who won't break when things get hard. The stage runs from Billings to Black Ridge once monthly, weather permitting. Wire me when you arrive in Montana territory, and I'll meet you. Respectfully, Caleb Boone. It was possibly the least romantic proposal in human history. It was also more honest than anything Evelyn had encountered in Charleston's polite society. The problem was, Caleb Boone thought he was corresponding with a woman who'd genuinely chosen this life. He didn't know about Clarissa's deception. He didn't know Evelyn was being sent west as punishment, as disposal, as a cruel joke. She should tell him. She should write immediately and explain the whole ugly truth. But every time Evelyn picked up her pen, she imagined his response. The rejection. The disgust at being played for a fool. The return letter telling her to stay in whatever city she'd reached, that he wanted nothing to do with liars or their cruel families. And then what? She had $50 and no skills valued by civilized society. She couldn't go back east. She had nowhere else to go. So she stayed silent, watching America scroll past the train windows, and tried not to think about what kind of man could survive alone in the wilderness for 6 years. Tried not to imagine the moment he discovered the truth. The landscape changed as they traveled. Forests gave way to plains. Cities became towns, then settlements, then just scattered buildings clinging to the railroad like barnacles. The air changed too. Thinner, drier, carrying scents Evelyn had never encountered in Charleston's humid streets. Other passengers got off at various stops. Families heading to Colorado, miners bound for Wyoming, ranchers returning to Montana. Slowly, the train emptied until Evelyn was nearly alone in her car, just her and an elderly woman who'd been visiting grandchildren in St. Louis. "Where you headed, dear?" the woman asked somewhere in Dakota Territory. "Black Ridge, Montana." "Oh my, that's rough country. You meeting family?" Evelyn hesitated. "Getting married." "How wonderful. What's his profession?" "He's a frontiersman, a trapper, I think. Hunter." The woman's smile dimmed slightly. "Well, that's certainly different from city life. You prepared for that kind of change?" "No," Evelyn said honestly. "Not even a little bit." The woman patted her hand. "Honesty's a good start, at least." Billings, Montana Territory, was barely a town. A handful of buildings, a train depot, and a saloon that seemed to be doing most of the town's business. Evelyn stepped off the train into autumn air so crisp it hurt to breathe, carrying her trunk and trying to figure out where exactly the stage to Black Ridge departed from. A man in a dusty coat pointed her toward a building that might generously be called a station. Inside, a bored-looking clerk looked up from a dime novel. "Help you?" "I need passage to Black Ridge." He set down his book. "Stage left yesterday. Next one's in 3 weeks." 3 weeks? "Weather's turning. Driver won't risk the mountain passes more than once monthly this time of year." He studied her. "You got somewhere to stay while you wait?" Evelyn's $50 suddenly seemed very small. No," the clerk sighed. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen runs it. Tell her Tom sent you. She'll probably give you a fair rate if you help with chores." 3 weeks in a frontier town, working for room and board, waiting to meet a man who expected someone completely different. Perfect. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was actually decent. Clean, warm, with real beds and food that tasted like someone cared. Mrs. Chen herself was a tiny Chinese woman who'd come west during the railroad construction and stayed after her husband died in a mining accident. She took one look at Evelyn and immediately put her to work hauling water, chopping wood, and doing all the heavy labor her regular boarders couldn't manage. "You're strong," Mrs. Chen observed on the 3rd day, watching Evelyn split firewood with an axe. "Very strong. This is good for frontier. Beauty doesn't keep you warm in winter." It was possibly the kindest thing anyone had said about Evelyn's appearance in years. The 3 weeks crawled past. Evelyn helped Mrs. Chen read every book she could find and tried to prepare herself for whatever came next. The other boarders, mostly miners and railroad workers, were rough but not unkind. A few tried flirting before realizing Evelyn had no interest and no patience. One of them, a leathery prospector named Dutch, gave her advice over dinner one night. "You headed to Black Ridge?" "Yes." "To marry Caleb Boone?" Evelyn's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You know him?" "Everyone in Montana knows of him. Man's a legend. Survived that winter of '71 when half the trappers in the territory froze to death. Killed a grizzly with a knife once when his rifle jammed. Lives so far up in the mountains, most folks think he's half wild himself." "Is he dangerous?" Dutch considered this. "Not to people who don't cross him, but he's hard. You understand? That country up there, it doesn't allow softness. You're either tough enough to survive or you die. Boone's tough enough." "What does he look like?" "Tall, maybe 6'3", built like he's made of rawhide and scars, got a beard down to here." Dutch gestured to his chest. "And eyes like a winter storm. Doesn't talk much, but when he comes to town for supplies, people get out of his way." Evelyn's terror notched higher. She'd agreed to marry a half-wild mountain giant who killed bears with knives. This was fine. Everything was fine. "Why'd he advertise for a wife?" she asked. Dutch shrugged. "Loneliness, maybe. Or maybe he just needs help. Running a trap line that big, managing a cabin through those winters. It's brutal work for one person. A partner would make sense. A partner. Not a wife in the romantic sense. A business arrangement. Somehow that was both more comforting and more terrifying." The stage to Black Ridge finally departed on a gray morning that threatened snow. Evelyn was the only passenger. The driver, a grim-faced man named Hank, loaded her trunk and gave her a look that suggested he thought she was insane. "You sure about this, miss? Black Ridge ain't like Billings. It's the edge of nowhere." "I'm sure," Evelyn lied. The journey took 2 days through mountain passes that made Evelyn understand why the stage only ran monthly. The road, barely worthy of the name, clung to cliff sides that dropped into darkness. Twice they had to stop while Hank cleared fallen rocks. Once, they rounded a bend and surprised a massive elk that stood in the middle of the path, staring at them with ancient eyes before disappearing into the forest. They spent the night at a way station so rough it made Mrs. Chen's boarding house look like a palace. Evelyn barely slept, listening to wind howl through gaps in the walls and trying not to think about what tomorrow would bring. The second day's travel was worse. Snow started falling around noon, light at first, then heavier. Hank muttered curses under his breath but kept the horses moving. By the time they reached Black Ridge, visibility had dropped to maybe 20 feet. "Here we are," Hank announced, pulling the stage to a halt. Paradise. Black Ridge wasn't even a proper town. Maybe 15 buildings clustered around a muddy main street, a general store, a saloon, a few cabins. Everything looked temporary, like the whole settlement might blow away in the next strong wind. And standing in front of the general store, waiting, was the biggest man Evelyn had ever seen, Caleb Boone. Dutch's description hadn't done him justice. The man was enormous, taller than 6'3", Evelyn thought, with shoulders like an ox and hands that could probably crush stones. He wore buckskins and a heavy fur coat, with a beard that was indeed chest length and dark hair pulled back in a leather tie. Scars crossed his face, one through his left eyebrow, another along his jaw. His eyes, even from a distance, were the pale gray of winter sky. He looked like something out of a nightmare or a legend, and Evelyn had about 30 seconds before she had to step out of the stage and meet him. Hank opened the door. "Miss Harrow?" Evelyn couldn't move. Her legs had forgotten how to work. Her lungs had forgotten how to breathe. "Miss?" Hank's voice softened slightly. "Want me to tell him you changed your mind? I can take you back to Billings." It was tempting, so tempting. But back to what? Mrs. Chen's charity? $50 and no prospects? The long trip back east to a family that had disposed of her like trash? Evelyn forced her legs to work. She climbed out of the stage into the falling snow, her boots sinking into mud, and looked up at Caleb Boone. Up close, he was even more intimidating. The scars on his face were joined by others visible at his collar and wrists. His hands really were massive. Scarred knuckles, 2 fingers on the left hand missing their tips, calluses thick as leather. He smelled like wood smoke and pine, and something wild that Charleston had never prepared her for. He studied her with those winter storm eyes, his expression completely unreadable. Miss Harrow. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel sliding down a mountain. Mr. Boone. Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she'd expected. I'm here. So I see. He glanced at Hank, who was already unloading her trunk. That all your belongings? Yes. A long pause. Snow collected on Evelyn's shoulders, in her hair. She felt his gaze taking in every detail. Her height, her build, her freckled face, her unfashionable traveling clothes. Looking for… what? Weakness? Lies? The truth Clarissa had hidden? Finally, he nodded once. Road to my cabin is 3 miles up the mountain. We should leave before the snow gets heavier. Now? Evelyn looked around. The settlement was barely visible in the storm. Shouldn't we wait until… Oh no. He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. Storm's gonna get worse. We leave now or we're stuck in town for days. He started walking toward a horse hitched outside the general store. Not a fine carriage horse like the ones in Charleston. This animal looked as wild and dangerous as its owner. A massive roan with scars on its flanks, and an eye that rolled white when Evelyn approached. Can you ride? Caleb asked, securing her trunk behind the saddle. Not well. You'll learn. He swung up onto the horse's back with ease, then extended his hand down to her. Come on. Evelyn stared at that scarred hand, at the missing fingertips, at the strength that could probably snap her wrist without effort. Behind her, Hank muttered something that might have been a prayer or might have been a curse. This was the moment. The last chance to refuse, to run, to choose something different. But there was nothing different to choose. Evelyn took Caleb Boone's hand. His grip was iron hard but carefully controlled as he pulled her up behind him like she weighed nothing. The horse danced sideways, annoyed at the extra weight, but Caleb controlled it with a word and a gentle pressure of his knees. Hold on, he said. Evelyn wrapped her arms around his waist. There was nowhere else to put them, and tried not to think about the fact that she was embracing a complete stranger. A complete stranger who was a giant mountain man covered in scars who'd lived alone for 6 years. The horse moved forward. Black Ridge disappeared behind them in the snow. The mountain swallowed them whole. They climbed in silence. The trail, barely visible, wound upward through pine forest so thick it blocked most of the falling snow. Evelyn held on, her arms aching, her whole body terrified of falling. Caleb rode like he'd been born on horseback, the horse responding to subtle cues Evelyn couldn't even detect. After maybe an hour, he spoke. You're scared. Not a question, a statement. Evelyn considered lying, then decided honesty might be the only card she had left to play. Yes. Of me? Of everything. A pause, then, that letter you wrote. Was it true? Evelyn's heart stopped. He knew. Somehow he knew. Which part? The part where you said you wanted to escape civilization, that you chose this. This was it. The moment to confess everything. Tell him about Clarissa's cruelty, her father's indifference, the whole ugly truth. But if she did, he'd turn around, take her back to Black Ridge, leave her there to figure out survival on her own with no money, no skills, and winter coming. I chose to leave Charleston, Evelyn said carefully. Whether I chose this specifically, I'm not sure choosing was really part of it. She felt him shift slightly in the saddle. What does that mean? It means I'm here, and I'm strong like I said, and I'll work. I'm not asking for romance or comfort, just a chance to be useful instead of useless. Another long silence. Snow fell harder. The horse's breath came out in great clouds of steam. Honesty, Caleb finally said. That's the only thing I care about up here. You can be scared. You can struggle. You can even fail sometimes. But you lie to me, we're done. Understand? Yes. Then we'll try this. See how it goes. It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't even really approval. But it was a chance, which was more than Evelyn had expected. The cabin appeared suddenly out of the storm. A solid structure built from massive logs, with a stone chimney already sending smoke into the gray sky. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, backed up against a cliff face that probably protected it from the worst winds. A small barn stood nearby. Firewood was stacked under a covered shelter. Everything looked sturdy, functional, built for survival rather than beauty. Caleb dismounted and helped Evelyn down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit solid ground. "Take your trunk inside," he said, already leading the horse toward the barn. "Fire's going. Make yourself warm. I'll be in once the horse is settled." He disappeared into the barn before Evelyn could respond. She picked up her trunk, grateful that her unfeminine strength was actually useful here, and approached the cabin door. It wasn't locked. The door swung open on leather hinges, revealing a single large room. It was, Evelyn had to admit, better than she'd expected. The main space held a stone fireplace with a good fire burning, a solid table with 2 chairs, shelves stacked with supplies, furs hanging on the walls for insulation. A ladder led to a loft area that was probably the sleeping quarters. The whole place smelled like smoke and pine and coffee. It was also dirty in a way that suggested a man living alone with priorities that didn't include dusting. Evelyn set her trunk down and looked around. This was it. This was her new home. A one-room cabin on the side of a mountain, 3 miles from the nearest settlement, owned by a scarred giant who'd lived alone so long he might have forgotten how to be human. She should cry. She should break down completely. Instead, something strange happened. Evelyn looked at the dusty shelves, the unwashed dishes stacked by a basin, the floor that hadn't been properly swept in probably months, and felt her hands twitch with the urge to fix things. Back in Charleston, she'd been useless. Decorative failures weren't allowed to be useful. But here? Here, usefulness was survival. She removed her coat and rolled up her sleeves. By the time Caleb returned from the barn, Evelyn had swept the floor, washed and put away the dishes, reorganized the food stores into some semblance of order, and started water heating for coffee. She'd found the coffee grounds by smell alone. The container wasn't labeled. He stopped in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, and stared. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning." Evelyn wiped her hands on her skirt, suddenly worried she'd overstepped. "I'm sorry, I should have asked. I just thought, it's fine." He shook snow from his coat and hung it on a peg by the door. Wasn't criticizing, just surprised. Why? Most women from civilized places would be having hysterics by now, or at least demanding to know where the servants are. His expression might have been amusement, but it was hard to tell under the beard. "I'm not most women." "No," Caleb agreed, moving to the fireplace to warm his hands. "I'm starting to see that." They stood in awkward silence. The fire crackled. Wind howled outside. Evelyn desperately tried to figure out what happened next. Did they discuss sleeping arrangements? Expectations? The fact that they were supposed to be married but were complete strangers? Caleb solved the problem by pulling a folded paper from his pocket and setting it on the table. "Found this pinned to your coat when you got off the stage. Hank gave it to me while you were standing there looking terrified." Evelyn's heart dropped into her stomach. She recognized Clarissa's handwriting on the outside of the folded note. She didn't want to look, didn't want to see what final cruelty her sister had prepared. "Read it," Caleb said quietly. Not a command. Not quite. With shaking hands, Evelyn unfolded the paper. "Dear Mountain Savage, congratulations on your new wife. Just a few things you should know about the merchandise you've received. Evelyn doesn't want to be there. She didn't write those letters. I did, using her name. She's being sent west because no civilized man would ever marry her. She's too tall, too strong, too ugly, and too useless for decent society. I'm sure she'll die quickly in the wilderness. Please don't feel obligated to send the body back. We'll tell everyone she's happy in her new frontier life. Do enjoy your joke of a bride. Warmest regards, Clarissa Harrow." The room spun. Evelyn couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Clarissa had done this, planned this, made sure that even if Evelyn survived the journey, the humiliation would be waiting for her. She waited for Caleb to explode, to demand she leave immediately, to... He picked up the letter, walked to the fireplace, and fed it to the flames. "There," he said, watching it burn. "Problem solved." But Evelyn couldn't form complete sentences. "You read it. You know. I did want to leave, but not like this. Not as a joke." "Stop." Caleb turned from the fireplace. His storm gray eyes met hers directly. "Your sister's a piece of work. Your father's probably worse. They sent you here thinking it was a death sentence, thinking you'd fail. I probably will fail. Maybe, he shrugged. Or maybe not. But here's what I know. You're strong. You can work. You're not crying or demanding to leave. And you cleaned my cabin without being asked, which shows you understand what life here actually requires. You're not angry about the deception. Oh, I'm angry, but not at you. He poured himself coffee from the pot Evelyn had prepared. I'm angry at the kind of people who'd treat family like garbage, the kind who'd send a woman into the wilderness as punishment and call it a joke. He took a sip, made an approving sound. Good coffee. Thank you. Evelyn felt like the cabin floor had become quicksand. Nothing made sense. So what happens now? Now? Caleb considered. Now we see if we can make this work. I need a partner. You need somewhere to be that isn't hell. We're both adults, both practical, both alone. That's not exactly a marriage. No, he agreed. It's not. But it might become one, given time, or it might just be a partnership. Either way, you'll have a home, protection, a life that's yours instead of something handed down to you by people who don't value you. It was possibly the strangest proposal, or non-proposal, Evelyn had ever imagined. It was also the first time anyone had ever suggested she might have value exactly as she was. I'll try, she said. I can't promise I'll succeed. I don't know anything about frontier life. I'm afraid of horses and probably bears and definitely the dark when it sounds like this. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, making her jump. Caleb's mouth twitched under his beard. Definitely amusement this time. Fear's not weakness. Fear keeps you careful, keeps you alive. He set down his coffee cup. You'll learn. I'll teach you. And if it doesn't work, well, spring comes eventually. Stage runs again. You can decide then. And until spring? Until spring, we survive together. He moved toward the ladder leading to the loft, then paused. I'll sleep up there. You can have the main floor by the fire. There's extra furs in that trunk by the wall. Storm's gonna last a few days, so we're stuck inside. Might as well get used to each other. He climbed the ladder and disappeared into the loft, leaving Evelyn alone by the fire in a cabin on the side of a mountain, with a man who just casually redefined her entire future in the space of a 5-minute conversation. She should be terrified. She should be planning escape. Instead, Evelyn found the trunk of furs, made herself a nest by the fireplace, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness, exactly. Not even hope, but possibility. The faint, stubborn suggestion that maybe, just maybe, the wilderness wouldn't destroy her after all. Outside, the storm howled and the mountains settled in for a long winter night. Inside, Evelyn Harrow closed her eyes and let the exhaustion of 17 days of travel finally claim her, with the warmth of the fire on her face and the sound of snow against the windows singing her into uneasy sleep. The first day of her new life was over. 6 months of winter stretched ahead. Evelyn woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood and the smell of coffee already brewing. Gray dawn light filtered through the cabin's single window, revealing a world buried in fresh snow. She sat up in her nest of furs, disoriented for a moment before memory crashed back. Montana. The cabin. Caleb Boone. The letter from Clarissa burning in the fireplace. She wasn't in Charleston anymore. That part, at least, was real. The cabin door opened, letting in a blast of cold air along with Caleb carrying an armload of split wood. He glanced at her, nodded once, and began stacking the logs by the fireplace without a word. Snow dusted his shoulders and beard. His breath came out in clouds. Morning? Evelyn managed, her voice rough from sleep. Storm passed an hour ago, left about 2 feet. He straightened, brushing bark from his hands. Coffee's ready. Food's in the pantry if you're hungry. Then he was gone again, back outside to whatever task came next. Evelyn sat there feeling useless and awkward, wrapped in borrowed furs in a strange man's cabin, with absolutely no idea what she was supposed to do with herself. Back in Charleston, her mornings had been regimented by society's expectations. Breakfast at 8, morning calls, needlework, all the delicate feminine tasks that Evelyn had never been good at, and nobody had wanted her help with anyway. Here, those rules meant nothing. Here, she had to figure out new ones. She folded the furs carefully, poured herself coffee in a tin cup that had probably seen a decade of use, and studied the cabin in daylight. It looked different now than it had last night. Still rough, still basic, but there was an efficiency to it that spoke of careful planning. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was decorative. The shelves held beans, flour, coffee, salt, sugar, dried meat. The furs on the walls weren't for show, they blocked drafts. The hooks by the door held tools, not coats, a life stripped down to pure function. Evelyn found bread wrapped in cloth and ate it slowly, washing it down with coffee so strong it could probably dissolve iron. Through the window, she could see Caleb moving between the cabin and the barn, carrying supplies, checking something on the roof. He moved with the kind of purposeful efficiency that came from years of doing everything alone. She should help. She should be useful. That was the deal, wasn't it? Partnership, work, survival. Evelyn pulled on her coat, inadequate for Montana winter, she was already realizing, and stepped outside into cold so sharp it felt like knives in her lungs. The snow came up past her ankles. The sky was that impossible blue that only comes after storms, and the mountains rose around them like ancient sentinels, their peaks white against the morning light. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight. Terrifying and beautiful, and so far removed from anything she'd known that it might as well have been a different planet. Caleb looked up from securing something on the barn wall. "You should stay inside, not dressed for this weather." "I want to help." "Help with what?" "Whatever needs doing." Evelyn crossed her arms against the cold. "You said partnership. Partners work together." He studied her for a long moment, those winter gray eyes unreadable. Then he nodded toward the barn. "Chickens need feeding. Goat needs milking. Can you manage that?" "I've never milked a goat in my life." "Then you'll learn." He went back to his work. "Buckets inside the barn. Feeds in the barrel by the door. Goat's name is Bess. Don't let her attitude fool you. She's mean, but she won't actually hurt you." The barn was warmer than outside, but still cold enough that Evelyn could see her breath. Half a dozen chickens roosted in one corner, clucking irritably at being disturbed. In a small pen, a white goat with devil eyes stared at Evelyn with obvious disdain. "Hello, Bess," Evelyn said cautiously. Bess made a sound that might have been a bleat or might have been a curse. The chickens were easy enough. Scatter feed, collect eggs, try not to get pecked. Evelyn found 4 eggs and felt absurdly proud of herself. The goat was another matter entirely. Bess had opinions about being milked by a stranger, and she expressed those opinions by kicking over the bucket twice, stepping in it once, and attempting to headbutt Evelyn into the wall. "You are a nightmare," Evelyn informed the goat, wrestling the bucket into position for a 4th attempt. "An absolute nightmare creature." "You talking to the goat?" Evelyn jumped, nearly dropping the bucket again. Caleb leaned in the barn doorway, watching with what might have been amusement. "She hates me." "She hates everyone. But you're doing it wrong." He moved into the barn, his size making the space feel suddenly smaller. "Here, like this." He demonstrated the grip, the rhythm, the way to position yourself so Bess couldn't kick effectively. His hands were enormous and scarred, but surprisingly gentle on the goat's udder. Milk streamed into the bucket in a steady rhythm. "Now you try." Evelyn positioned herself the way he'd shown, tried the grip. Bess tolerated it for maybe 10 seconds before attempting to kick again, but this time Evelyn was ready and dodged. "Better," Caleb said. "Keep practicing. She'll get used to you eventually." "When? Next spring?" "Maybe by next fall, if you're lucky." That was definitely amusement in his voice now. "Bess took 6 months to tolerate me, and I saved her from a mountain lion." He left Evelyn alone with the devil goat. It took another 20 minutes of struggle, but she managed to get perhaps a cup of milk before Bess decided the morning's torture was complete and simply sat down in stubborn refusal. "Fine," Evelyn told her. "We'll try again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day until you accept that I live here now." Bess made a sound like a laugh. When Evelyn returned to the cabin, Caleb had breakfast ready. Bacon frying in a cast-iron skillet, bread toasting on the fire, the eggs Evelyn had collected scrambled with something that might have been wild onions. It smelled better than anything she'd eaten in weeks. They ate in silence. Evelyn kept stealing glances at Caleb, trying to figure him out. He ate with single-minded focus, the way someone eats when food is fuel rather than pleasure. When he finished, he pushed his plate back and finally spoke. "Winter up here is different than what you're used to." "I gathered that." I mean, it's dangerous. Storm like last night? That's mild for December. By January, we might get snowed in for weeks at a time. Temperature drops so low you can freeze to death in minutes if you're not careful. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to prepare you. He poured more coffee. You need to know what you're facing, what we're both facing for the next 6 months. Evelyn set down her cup. Then tell me. All of it. So he did. He told her about winters where the snow piled so high it covered the cabin windows, about ice storms that could kill livestock and shred trees, about the constant need for firewood, for water that had to be melted from snow, for food that had to be carefully rationed, about the isolation, the way you could go months without seeing another human face, about the sounds at night, wolves howling, trees cracking in the cold, avalanches in the distance. The biggest danger isn't the weather, he said. It's complacency. You get comfortable, you get careless, you die. Out here, there's no room for mistakes. Have you made mistakes? He held up his left hand, showing the 2 fingers missing their tips. Frostbite. First winter alone. Got too focused on checking trap lines, didn't notice the cold until it was too late. He lowered his hand, lost the fingers, learned the lesson. What lesson? That the mountain doesn't care how tough you think you are. It'll kill you if you let it. Evelyn looked at her own hands, soft, uncalloused, useless. How do I learn? How do I become someone who can survive this? You already started. You fed the chickens, fought with Bess, didn't panic when I told you how bad it gets. He stood, collecting the dishes. Most people from civilization would be demanding to leave by now. I have nowhere to leave to. That's not the only reason you're staying. It wasn't a question, and Evelyn didn't answer it. She wasn't entirely sure what the other reasons were. Fear of going back, stubborn pride, or something else. Something that whispered that maybe here, in this brutal place, she might finally matter. The days fell into rhythm. Caleb would wake before dawn, start the fire, put on coffee. Evelyn learned to wake with him instead of sleeping past sunrise like she had in Charleston. Together they'd handle morning chores, feeding animals, collecting eggs, hauling water, chopping wood. Caleb would disappear for hours, checking trap lines or hunting, leaving Evelyn alone in the cabin to handle whatever tasks he'd assigned. At first, those solitary hours terrified her. Every sound was a bear. Every shadow was danger. But slowly, she learned the difference between wind and threat, between normal creaks and actual problems. The cabin became familiar instead of foreign. She learned to cook on the fireplace, actual cooking, not the decorative instruction she'd received in Charleston. Caleb showed her how to make sourdough bread from starter he'd been maintaining for years, how to render fat for tallow, how to smoke meat so it would last through winter. His teaching style was blunt and practical, with no patience for mistakes, but also no cruelty when she failed. Try again, he'd say when she burned the bread or ruined a batch of stew. You'll get it. And eventually, she did. 2 weeks into her new life, Evelyn successfully milked Bess without getting kicked, and felt more accomplished than she'd ever felt at a Charleston social function. The real change happened gradually. Her soft hands developed calluses, her back stopped aching from chopping wood, her fear of the dark woods lessened as familiarity replaced terror. She learned which sounds meant danger, and which were just the mountain settling in for winter. She also learned Caleb Boone in small pieces, like assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing. He'd grown up in Kentucky, the youngest of 7 brothers. Came west at 19 chasing gold dreams that hadn't panned out. Found he preferred trapping to mining, solitude to civilization. Spent 6 years mostly alone, except for occasional trips to Black Ridge for supplies. Why'd you advertise for a wife? Evelyn asked one night while they were preparing dinner together. If you prefer being alone? Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, being alone isn't the same as preferring it. I'm good at solitude. Doesn't mean I want it forever. So you wanted company. I wanted a partner, someone who could handle this life. Most women couldn't. He glanced at her. Most men couldn't either. You think I can handle it? You're still here. That's something. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her, and Evelyn felt absurdly pleased. The first real test came 3 weeks after her arrival. Caleb woke her in the middle of the night, his hand on her shoulder and his voice urgent. Get up, quietly. Evelyn's heart jumped into her throat. What's wrong? Grizzly, near the barn. She was awake instantly. Through the window, she could see the barn door hanging open. Not how they'd left it. Something large moved in the shadows. Caleb was already loading his rifle. "Bear's after the chickens, maybe the goat. I need you to stay inside, bar the door behind me, and don't open it for anything except my voice. Understand? You're going out there alone? It's one bear. I've handled worse." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Evelyn, the bar. Promise me." "I promise." He slipped outside into the darkness. Evelyn dropped the heavy bar across the door and pressed her face to the window, trying to see. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows. She could make out Caleb's shape moving toward the barn, the rifle ready. Could see something massive near the barn entrance, big enough to make even Caleb look small by comparison. The bear reared up on its hind legs, 7 feet tall, maybe 8. Evelyn had never seen anything so enormous outside of a museum. Caleb fired. The shot cracked across the frozen night like thunder. The bear roared, a sound that made every primitive part of Evelyn's brain scream danger, and charged. Caleb stood his ground, calmly working the rifle's bolt, firing again. The second shot hit home. The grizzly crashed to the ground 10 feet from where Caleb stood, rolled once, and went still. Evelyn's hand shook so badly she had to grip the windowsill. She'd just watched a man kill a grizzly bear like it was a minor inconvenience. Caleb checked the bear, making sure it was dead, then approached the cabin. "It's me. Open up." Evelyn lifted the bar with trembling hands. Caleb stepped inside, set the rifle down, and immediately went to check the fire like he hadn't just killed a creature that could have torn him apart. "You're not even shaken," Evelyn said. Bear was old, probably desperate for food before hibernation. Not the first time I've dealt with one near the cabin. He poured himself coffee. "Won't be the last either. They remember where food is." "How do you do that? Stay so calm?" "Panic gets you killed. Calm keeps you alive." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You did good. Stayed inside like I told you. Didn't try to help." "I felt useless." "You stayed safe. That's not useless. That's smart." He set down the cup. "Get some sleep. Morning's gonna come early. We need to butcher that bear before the meat spoils." Evelyn lay back down in her furs but didn't sleep for hours. She kept seeing the bear charging, kept hearing that terrible roar, kept thinking about how easily Caleb had handled it and how completely out of her depth she still was. Butchering the grizzly was exactly as brutal as it sounded. Caleb worked with the efficiency of long practice, showing Evelyn how to skin the massive carcass, how to identify good meat, how to render the fat. The work was bloody and exhausting, and unlike anything Evelyn had experienced in her entire life. "In Charleston," she said, elbow deep in bear innards, "I would faint at the sight of blood at dinner parties. What changed?" "I don't know. Maybe I'm just too tired to faint." She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, probably streaking bear blood across her face. "Or maybe I was never actually that delicate. Maybe I was just playing the part everyone expected." Caleb grunted agreement. "People are tougher than they think. Life just doesn't always give them reason to find out." They worked until dark, then through the next day. The cabin filled with meat smoking over the fire, fat rendering in pots. The bear hide stretched for tanning. Nothing went to waste. Even the bones would be boiled for broth. "This bear will feed us for months," Caleb said, surveying their work with satisfaction. "Good protein. We were running low." "Does this happen often? Bears attacking?" "Often enough. Mountain lions sometimes too. Wolves if the pack gets desperate." He cleaned his knife, the blade catching firelight. "That's why the rifle stays loaded. Why I need you to learn to shoot." "Me? You think I can be here every second? What happens if I'm out on the trap line and something comes? You planning to talk it to death?" The next morning, he taught her to shoot. Started with a lighter rifle than his own, showing her how to hold it, how to aim, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. The first shot knocked her back a step and left her ears ringing. "Again," Caleb said. By the end of the week, Evelyn could hit a target more often than not. By the end of the month, Caleb trusted her to keep the rifle with her when he was gone. "You're learning," he said one evening, watching her clean the rifle with the same care he'd taught her. "Faster than I expected." "I'm motivated. Death is motivating." "It's more than that." He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You're not fighting what you are anymore. Back east, you tried to be small, delicate, what they wanted. Here, you're just you, strong, capable, real. Evelyn looked up from the rifle. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, but there was warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. You're becoming someone who belongs here. December deepened into January. The snow piled higher. The cold became something personal, something that sought out any weakness. Evelyn learned to dress in layers, to wrap her face against frostbite, to read the weather in the sky and clouds. She also learned Caleb's silences, learned that quiet didn't mean anger or disapproval. It just meant he was comfortable enough not to fill the space with unnecessary words. Learned that he showed care through actions rather than words, making sure she had the warmest furs, saving her the best portions of meat, teaching her skills without making her feel incompetent. One night, a blizzard hit so hard they couldn't even leave the cabin. Wind screamed around the walls, snow piled against the door. They sat by the fire, Caleb mending trap springs, while Evelyn attempted to sew. A skill she'd never mastered in Charleston and wasn't mastering any better in Montana. You're holding the needle wrong, Caleb said without looking up from his work. I'm holding it the way I was taught. Then you were taught wrong. He set aside his tools and moved to sit beside her. Here, like this. He took her hand, adjusting her grip, showing her the proper angle and motion. His hands were so much larger than hers, scarred and calloused, but surprisingly gentle. Evelyn found herself very aware of how close he was sitting, how warm he was in the cold cabin. Try now, he said, releasing her hand. She managed 3 decent stitches before the thread tangled. I'm hopeless. You're learning. There's a difference. He went back to his own work, but stayed sitting beside her instead of returning to his previous spot across the fire. They worked in comfortable silence while the blizzard raged outside. At some point, Evelyn's head drooped with exhaustion and landed on Caleb's shoulder. She jerked awake, starting to apologize, but he just shifted slightly to give her a better angle. Sleep if you need to. Storm's got hours left in it. Evelyn meant to move back to her own furs, meant to maintain the careful distance they'd kept for weeks. Instead, she let her eyes close and drifted off with her head on Caleb Boone's shoulder, listening to the storm try and fail to break down their walls. When she woke, dawn light filled the cabin. She was covered in the warmest furs, the fire had been built up, and Caleb was already outside shoveling snow away from the door. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in white silence. Evelyn lay there for a moment, warm and safe, and realized something that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. She was happy. Not the fragile, conditional happiness she'd occasionally glimpsed in Charleston between bouts of humiliation and rejection. Real happiness. The kind that came from knowing exactly where you stood, what was expected of you, and that you were capable of meeting those expectations. The kind that came from partnership with someone who saw your worth. She got up, dressed quickly in the cold, and went outside to help dig out from the storm. Caleb looked up as she approached, his face half hidden behind layers of wool against the cold, but she could see the approval in his eyes. Storm dropped another 3 feet, he said. We'll be digging all day. Then we'd better get started. They worked side by side in the frigid morning, clearing paths to the barn, checking on the animals, making sure nothing had been damaged. Hard work, endless work, but Evelyn attacked it with energy that would have shocked her Charleston self. That night, over dinner, Caleb spoke suddenly. Spring comes in April usually. Stage starts running regular again in May. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Are you asking me to leave? I'm reminding you that you can, that you're not trapped here. He met her eyes directly. You came here believing you had no choice, but you've got skills now. You're strong. You could make it on your own if you wanted. Find work in Billings, or even go back east if that's what you choose. Do you want me to leave? No. The word was immediate and certain. But I need you to stay because you want to, not because you're scared of the alternative. Evelyn considered this. She thought about Charleston, about her father and Clarissa, about that entire life that had made her feel invisible. Thought about the stage back to Billings, about starting over somewhere new. Then she thought about this cabin, these mountains, this man who'd given her the chance to become someone real. I'm staying, she said. Not because I'm scared to leave, because this is the first place I've ever felt like I actually belong. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite a smile. He wasn't the smiling type, but something warm and satisfied. Good, he said, because I've gotten used to having you around. Be ashamed to go back to doing everything alone. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to Evelyn, and it wasn't remotely romantic by conventional standards. But it was honest and real, and from a man who didn't waste words on things he didn't mean. February brought the coldest temperatures yet. The world outside became a frozen hell where exposed skin could freeze in seconds. They stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only for necessary tasks. The isolation was total. They hadn't seen another human being since Evelyn's arrival months ago. But isolation with Caleb felt different than the isolation Evelyn had experienced in Charleston, surrounded by people who treated her like furniture. Here, she was seen, valued, needed. They talked more as the long night stretched on. Caleb told her about his brothers, about the childhood in Kentucky that had taught him self-reliance, about the first time he'd seen the mountains and known he'd found home. Evelyn told him about her mother's death, about growing up in her sister's shadow, about the quiet desperation of trying and failing to be what society demanded. "You were wasted there," Caleb said one night. "All that strength, that capability." They tried to bury it. They succeeded for a long time. "No, they just convinced you to bury it yourself. Different thing." He poked the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "You're not buried anymore." On Valentine's Day, not that they celebrated it, Evelyn woke to find a carved wooden box on the table beside her furs. Inside was a necklace made from polished stones and carved bone, clearly handmade with considerable skill. Caleb was already up, pretending to be very focused on cooking breakfast. "Did you make this?" Evelyn asked. "Figured you should have something that's actually yours, not borrowed, not temporary." He still didn't look at her. "If you don't like it, it's beautiful." Evelyn fastened it around her neck. The stones were cool against her skin. "Thank you." He finally looked at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You're welcome." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Bess bleated irritably from the barn, shattering the spell, and they both laughed. "Devil Goat has timing," Caleb muttered. "She's protective of you. Doesn't trust me stealing your attention." "She'll have to learn to share." The comment was casual, but it carried weight. Evelyn felt it settle around her shoulders like the necklace. A claim, a promise, a future that neither of them had quite named yet, but both acknowledged was building. March came with the first hints of thaw. The days grew longer. The snow began to recede from its highest points. Caleb started planning for spring work, clearing the trap lines, preparing for planting, all the tasks that winter's grip had prevented. "You'll need to learn to ride properly," he told Evelyn. "Can't have you terrified of horses forever." "I'm not terrified. I'm cautiously wary." "You're terrified. I've seen you flinch when the horse sneezes." So he taught her to ride. Started with gentle work in the cleared area near the cabin, teaching her to sit properly, to guide with her knees, to trust the horse's instincts. Evelyn fell off twice, got kicked once, and seriously considered murder when Caleb laughed at her third tumble into a snowbank. "You're supposed to be supportive," she said, spitting out snow. "I am being supportive. I'm not helping you up, which means I believe you can do it yourself." She threw a snowball at him. He dodged, still laughing, and pulled her to her feet with one hand. "Again," he said. By the end of March, Evelyn could ride well enough to accompany Caleb on short trips to check the nearest trap lines. The first time they rode out together, side by side through the forest, Evelyn felt something click into place. This was partnership. This was what they'd been building toward all winter. They stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley. From here you could see for miles, endless mountains rolling away to the horizon, snow-covered and magnificent. The cabin was visible far below, smoke rising from its chimney. "This is your land?" Evelyn asked. "Some of it. Most of the mountains belong to whoever's tough enough to claim them." He gestured toward the valley. "But the cabin and surrounding area, that's legally mine. Filed the claim 5 years back. It's beautiful. It's brutal, but yeah, it's beautiful too." He looked at her instead of the view. "You really staying? Last chance to change your mind before the pass is open and the stage starts running." Evelyn met his eyes. "I'm staying, Caleb. I told you that already." Saying it and meaning it are different things. Winter's one thing, but staying for good, becoming part of this life permanently, that's a choice you can't undo easily. "I know. I'm choosing it anyway." She touched the necklace he'd made her. I'm choosing you, this, all of it. Then I need to ask you something proper. He dismounted, helped her down, and stood facing her on that windswept ridge. Evelyn Harrow, will you actually marry me? Not as an arrangement, not as partnership, as a real marriage. Evelyn's heart hammered. Are you sure? You barely know me. I've watched you face down a devil goat every morning for 4 months. I've seen you learn to shoot, to ride, to survive in country that breaks most people. I know you well enough. His expression softened. And I care for you. More than I expected. More than I probably should this fast. I care for you too. The words felt inadequate for the truth of it. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Properly. Caleb pulled her close and kissed her. The first kiss they'd shared, awkward and cold-nosed and perfect. When they broke apart, both of them were grinning like idiots. We'll need to ride to Black Ridge when the pass is clear, he said. Find whatever pass is for a minister in this territory. Sounds perfect. They rode back to this cabin hand in hand when the terrain allowed it, and Evelyn felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She wasn't the unwanted daughter anymore. Wasn't the joke, or the burden, or the failure. She was Evelyn Boone. And she was home. They were married on the first day of April in Black Ridge's only church, which was really just a room above the general store where a circuit preacher held services when he passed through town. The preacher was a rail-thin man named Hutchins, who'd seen enough frontier marriages to ask no questions about romance or courtship, just whether they were both willing and of sound mind. Sound mind is debatable, Evelyn muttered as they signed the register, and Caleb's mouth twitched under his beard. The witnesses were Dutch, the prospector who'd warned Evelyn about Caleb months ago, and Mrs. Chen's niece who'd come west to help with the boarding house. Afterward, they had dinner at the saloon, which served the closest thing to a wedding feast Black Ridge could offer. Venison steaks, potatoes, bread that was only slightly stale, and whiskey that could strip paint. To the happy couple, Dutch raised his glass. May you survive each other longer than you survive the mountains. That's the most depressing toast I've ever heard, Evelyn said. It's also the most honest one you'll get in this territory. Dutch grinned. But seriously, Boone, you picked a good one. A woman who can milk Bess without losing a finger is worth her weight in gold. They rode back to this cabin the next morning, Evelyn's new ring, a simple band Caleb had traded furs for, catching the sunlight. It felt strange and right all at once, this tangible proof that she belonged to someone and he belonged to her. Not in the way Charleston society meant belonging, where women were property and ornaments, but as equals. Partners. Two people choosing each other against the backdrop of a world that didn't care whether they lived or died. Spring arrived in fits and starts, warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, as if winter couldn't quite let go. Caleb worked from dawn to dark clearing trap lines, repairing winter damage, preparing the small garden plot near the cabin. Evelyn worked beside him, her hands developing new calluses, her body growing stronger with each passing day. We should expand the garden this year, she said one afternoon while they were turning soil. I was reading that book on your shelf about crop rotation, and I think if we... You read my farming manual? I read all your books. There wasn't much else to do during the worst of winter. Evelyn drove the shovel deeper. The geology one was particularly interesting. Caleb straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. Geology? You have a whole section on mineral deposits and rock formations. I didn't know you were interested in mining. I'm not particularly. Bought those books off a prospector who needed cash more than reading material. He studied her curiously. Why would that interest you? Evelyn hesitated. Back in Charleston, she'd spent countless hours in her father's library, secretly reading his business books, his geological surveys, anything that might make her useful if anyone ever noticed her. She'd developed a genuine fascination with how the earth formed, how minerals deposited, how fortunes could be made or lost, based on understanding rock and stone. I just find it interesting, she said finally, the way mountains form, how you can read history in layers of rock. Caleb looked like he wanted to pursue that conversation, but a distant crack of thunder interrupted. Dark clouds were building over the peaks. Storm coming, he said. We should secure everything and get inside. They'd barely finished when the sky opened up. Not snow this time, but rain, cold, driving rain that turned the world gray, and made the cabin feel like the only solid thing in existence. They spent the evening by the fire, Evelyn attempting to sew a tear in one of Caleb's shirts while he worked on carving new trap triggers. "I need to check the upper trap line tomorrow," he said, without looking up from his work. "Weather clears. I'll head out early. Be gone maybe 3-4 days." Evelyn's needle paused mid-stitch. 4 days? Lines stretch pretty far up the mountain. Can't check them all in one trip. He finally looked at her. "You'll be fine. You know how to handle the animals, keep the fire going, use the rifle if you need to." "I know, She couldn't quite name what she felt. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. "I've never been alone here." "You won't be alone. You'll have Bess for company." "That's supposed to be comforting?" Caleb smiled, a real smile, not just the slight upturn of his mouth. "You'll manage. You're tougher than you think." The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of pine and wet earth. Caleb packed supplies while Evelyn tried not to show how anxious his departure made her. 4 days wasn't forever. She'd survived worse. She'd survived Charleston, hadn't she? "Bar the door at night," Caleb said, checking his rifle one final time. "Keep the fire going. Don't go wandering off into the woods, no matter how curious you get about rock formations." "I'm not going to go wandering. You've been eyeing those ridges above the cabin for weeks. I know that look." He kissed her forehead. "I'll be back before you know it. Try not to let Bess convince you she needs extra grain. She's a liar and a manipulator." Then he was gone, riding up the mountain trail until the trees swallowed him whole. The first day alone wasn't terrible. Evelyn kept busy with chores, milking Bess, who seemed extra ornery without Caleb around, feeding the chickens, chopping firewood, cleaning the cabin from top to bottom. She made bread, mended clothes, organized the pantry for the third time. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. The second day dragged. The silence felt oppressive in a way it never had when Caleb was just in the barn or out hunting nearby. This silence meant complete solitude, just her and the mountain and the endless forest stretching in every direction. She tried reading, but couldn't focus. Tried more chores, but ran out of tasks. Finally, driven by restlessness and that curiosity Caleb had noticed, she grabbed his geology book and walked up to the ridge behind the cabin. The view from up there was spectacular. The whole valley spread out below, the cabin looking like a child's toy in the distance. But what caught Evelyn's attention were the exposed rock faces, the layers of stone visible where weather had stripped away soil and vegetation. She opened the book, comparing what she saw to the descriptions and diagrams. Sedimentary layers here, volcanic intrusion there. The mountain was a history book written in stone, telling stories millions of years old. And then she saw it. A vein of rock running through the cliff face, different from the surrounding stone. Darker, with a metallic sheen where the sun hit it right. Her heart started pounding as she moved closer, pulling out the small knife she carried and chipping at the stone. The sample came away easily, heavy for its size. She rubbed dirt from the surface, revealing the telltale silver-gray color she'd read about in her father's mining reports years ago. "No," Evelyn whispered. "No, that's not possible." But it was. She was looking at a silver deposit, possibly a significant one based on how thick the vein appeared. Right here on Caleb's land. Right here on their land. She should wait. Should show Caleb when he returned. Should... A sound from the forest below froze every thought in her head. Voices. Men's voices. And they were getting closer. Evelyn scrambled down from the ridge, shoving the rock sample in her pocket and moving as quietly as she could back toward the cabin. Through the trees she could see movement. 3 men on horses riding up the trail toward her home. She made it to the cabin door just as they entered the clearing. Her hand went to the rifle Caleb had left her, checking to make sure it was loaded. The men dismounted. They looked rough even by frontier standards. Dirty, unshaven, with the kind of eyes that calculated what they could take rather than what they could trade for. The one in front, a tall man with a scar bisecting his face from temple to jaw, studied the cabin with obvious interest. "Well, well," he said. "Looks like somebody's home. See the smoke from the chimney, boys?" "I see it, Silas," one of his companions said. "Think it's Boone?" Boone's supposed to be up checking lines this time of year, probably just his woman. The scarred man, Silas, smiled, revealing teeth stained brown from tobacco. "Even better." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She stepped back from the window, mind racing. 3 armed men. She had 1 rifle with 7 rounds. The nearest help was 3 miles down a mountain trail, and no one in Black Ridge would hear a gunshot from here. She was completely alone. A knock on the door made her jump. "Hello in there," Silas called out in a mockery of politeness. "We're just travelers looking for some hospitality, maybe a warm meal and a place to rest our horses." Evelyn didn't answer. Her father had taught her one useful thing: never negotiate with people who already intended to take what they wanted. "Now don't be unfriendly," Silas continued. "We know someone's in there. Saw you running back from the ridge. Pretty lady like you shouldn't be all alone up here. Dangerous country for a woman." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Evelyn checked the rifle again, making sure she remembered everything Caleb had taught her. Breathe, aim, squeeze. Don't jerk. 7 shots. Make them count. "We can do this easy or hard," Silas said, his voice losing its false friendliness. "But either way, we're coming in. Boone's been bragging about his new wife down in Black Ridge. Curious to meet her ourselves." One of the other men laughed, an ugly sound that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "Tell you what," Silas said. "You open this door nice and peaceful, share what food you got, maybe we just take some supplies and be on our way. You make us break it down, well, we'll take more than supplies." Evelyn's hands shook. She forced them steady. These men thought she was some delicate Eastern lady playing at frontier life. They thought she'd be easy prey. They were about to learn otherwise. "I've got a rifle," she called out, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "It's loaded, and I know how to use it. You should leave." Silence. Then Silas laughed. "Oh, she's got spirit. I like that." His voice hardened. "Listen, darling, I've been shot before. It didn't take. You really want to test whether you can kill all 3 of us before we get through that door?" He had a point. Even if she was a perfect shot, which she wasn't, 3 targets were 3 chances to miss, 3 chances for them to rush her position. But giving up meant something worse than dying. Evelyn had spent her whole life being pushed around by people who thought she was weak. She'd escaped that world. She'd be damned if she let it follow her here. "Last chance," Silas said. "Open the door." Evelyn raised the rifle, aimed at the center of the door where she thought he was standing, and fired. The shot punched through the wood. Someone swore. Silas. His voice pained, but not incapacitated. She'd winged him at best. "You bitch!" The false politeness was gone completely now. "Boys, break it down!" They hit the door hard. The bar held, but barely. These weren't flimsy Charleston doors. Caleb had built this cabin to withstand weather and animals, and the door was solid oak reinforced with iron. But 3 men with enough motivation could break through anything eventually. Evelyn fired again through the door, heard another curse. 5 shots left. The door shuddered under renewed assault. Evelyn looked around frantically. The cabin had 1 door, 1 window. She couldn't defend both. If they got smart, sent someone around to break the window while the others kept hitting the door. Her eyes landed on the pot of grease hanging over the fire, left from breakfast that morning. An idea formed, desperate, probably stupid, but better than just waiting to be overrun. Evelyn grabbed the pot. It was still warm, the grease liquid, and positioned herself by the window. Sure enough, one of the men was already moving around the side of the cabin, heading for the exact vulnerability she'd anticipated. The moment he appeared at the window, Evelyn threw the entire pot of boiling grease in his face. His screams could probably be heard in Black Ridge. He went down thrashing, clawing at his eyes, his face already blistering. Evelyn grabbed the rifle and shot him while he was down, not out of cruelty, but because 1 less threat meant better odds of survival. 4 shots left, 2 men outside. The door splintered. One of the hinges gave way. Evelyn retreated to the corner farthest from the door, rifle raised, and waited. Her heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Her hands shook despite her best efforts to steady them. She was terrified. But she was also furious. These men had come to her home, had threatened her, had intended to do things she wouldn't even let herself think about. And they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed she would break. The door crashed inward. Silas came through first, blood streaming from a wound in his shoulder where her first shot had caught him. His gun was raised, his face twisted with rage. Evelyn shot him center mass. He went down hard, surprise replacing rage in his eyes. Lay still. The third man appeared in the doorway, took one look at his dead companion, and ran. Evelyn ran to the broken door, saw him already on his horse, galloping down the mountain trail like death itself was chasing him. She could shoot, probably should shoot, but her hands were shaking too badly now for accuracy, and she'd already killed 2 men today. 2 men whose bodies were bleeding out on her cabin floor and in her yard. She lowered the rifle and promptly vomited in the snow. The next hours passed in a blur. Evelyn dragged the body out of the cabin. Harder than it should have been. The man was heavy, and dead weight was aptly named. She couldn't do anything about the one in the yard, couldn't face touching another corpse. She barred what was left of the door as best she could, built up the fire, and sat with the rifle across her lap, shaking uncontrollably. She'd killed 2 people, shot them like Caleb had shot that grizzly, out of necessity, out of survival. But a bear wasn't a person. A bear didn't have a face that you'd see every time you closed your eyes. Night fell. Evelyn didn't sleep. Every sound made her jump, certain the 3rd man was coming back with reinforcements, or that more outlaws would appear, or that she'd imagined the whole thing and Caleb would return to find her insane, surrounded by bodies she'd hallucinated. Dawn came gray and cold. The bodies were still there, very real, very dead. Evelyn was still alive, which seemed almost surprising. She made coffee with hands that barely worked, drank it scalding hot, and tried to figure out what to do. She should ride to Black Ridge, get help, report what happened. But that meant leaving the cabin undefended, and she couldn't quite make herself do it. So she waited. The second day after the attack, she heard horses coming up the trail and nearly shot Caleb before recognizing him. He took one look at the scene, the broken door, the body in the yard, Evelyn's hollow-eyed face, and was off his horse before it fully stopped. What happened? He was checking her for injuries, his hands gentle but thorough. Are you hurt? Did they... I'm fine. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. They came. 3 of them. The one who ran said their names were Silas Crow and his brothers. They wanted food and other things. I shot 2 of them. The 3rd one ran. Caleb pulled her against his chest, and only then did Evelyn start crying, great gasping sobs that she couldn't control. She'd held it together for 2 days, but now that he was here, now that she wasn't alone anymore, everything broke. You did good, Caleb murmured into her hair. You survived. That's all that matters. I killed them. They came to our home planning to hurt you. You defended yourself. That's not murder, Evelyn. That's survival. He held her tighter. I'm sorry. I should never have left you alone. Should have known Crow was in the area. There'd been rumors in town, but I thought he'd moved on. You couldn't have known. I should have. His voice was rough with emotion. When I saw you standing there, when I thought I'd lost you. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Evelyn felt it in how tightly he held her, like if he let go, she might disappear. They buried the bodies that afternoon in a clearing away from the cabin. Caleb said words over the graves. Not prayers exactly, more acknowledgement that even bad men deserved earth and silence. Then they rode to Black Ridge together to report what happened. The sheriff, a weathered man named Pike, took their statement with grim efficiency. Silas Crow's been trouble for years, he said. Got warrants in 3 territories for robbery and worse. You did us a favor putting him down. He looked at Evelyn with something like respect. Took guts to stand up to 3 armed men alone. Took terror and desperation, Evelyn corrected. Guts makes it sound braver than it was. Same thing out here. They stayed in town that night at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Caleb didn't want Evelyn going back to the cabin yet, not until he'd repaired the door and cleaned up the remaining bloodstains. Mrs. Chen took one look at Evelyn's face and made her strong tea laced with something that made her sleep without dreams. The next morning, Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, where Evelyn had finally woken after 12 hours of dead sleep. I've been thinking, he said, about what you said, about the geology books. Evelyn's hand went automatically to her pocket, where the rock sample still rested. In all the chaos, she'd forgotten about it. I found something, she said quietly. Up on the ridge behind the cabin, the day they came. She pulled out the sample, handed it to him. Caleb turned it over in his scarred hands, held it up to the window light. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. This is silver. I think so. There's a whole vein of it in the cliff face. Maybe more. I didn't have time to look properly before... She gestured vaguely, unable to say, "Before men came to murder me." "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without proper assay equipment, but I spent years reading my father's mining reports. He invested in half the silver mines in Nevada. I know what the ore looks like." Evelyn met his eyes. "Caleb, if that vein is as rich as I think it is, if it extends deeper into the mountain, we could be sitting on a fortune." He was quiet for a long time, turning the rock over and over. "You know what happens when word gets out about silver deposits?" he finally said. "Men come. Lots of men. The kind who'd make Silas Crow look civilized. They'd stake claims on every inch of land around us, tear the mountain apart looking for more. Our quiet life would be over." "I know. But if we filed the claim first, did it legal and proper?" He looked at her. "You really think it's worth pursuing?" "I think it could change everything. We could hire men to work the mine, sell the ore, build something real." "But you're right. It would change our life completely. We'd have to decide if that's what we want." Caleb set the rock on the bedside table. "Let's go home first. Fix the cabin. Get back to normal. Then we'll ride back up to that ridge together, and you can show me what you found. We'll decide together." "Together," Evelyn agreed. They spent the next week making the cabin whole again. Caleb built a new door, stronger than the first, with reinforced hinges and a better bar. He installed shutters on the window that could be barred from inside, made the whole place into something that could actually withstand a siege if needed. Evelyn worked beside him, and slowly the nightmares of the attack began to fade. Not disappear. She didn't think they'd ever fully disappear, but recede enough that she could sleep without jerking awake at every sound. Bess, surprisingly, seemed to sense something had changed. The devil goat actually let Evelyn approach without trying to headbutt her, and one morning even pressed against Evelyn's leg like she was offering comfort. "I think Bess might actually like me now," Evelyn said in amazement. "Took you getting attacked by outlaws to earn her respect." Caleb scratched the goat's ears. "She's got standards." When the cabin was secure again and life had settled back into something approaching normal, they rode up to the ridge together. Evelyn showed Caleb the vein, explained what she saw in the rock formations, pointed out where she thought the deposit might extend deeper into the mountain. He listened carefully, asked intelligent questions, examined the stone with the same thorough attention he gave to everything. "You're right," he said finally. "This is significant, maybe very significant." "So what do we do?" Caleb looked out over the valley, at the cabin far below, at the endless mountains stretching to the horizon. "We file the claim. We do it quiet and legal. We work it ourselves for now, see what we're really dealing with. And we don't tell anyone except the assayer and the claims office what we found." "Why not?" "Because the moment word gets out about a major silver strike, this whole mountain will be crawling with prospectors and thieves. We need to secure our claim first, understand what we have, and be ready for what comes next." He took her hand. "You ready for that? For everything that comes with it?" Evelyn thought about Charleston, about being the unwanted daughter shipped west as punishment. Thought about learning to survive in the wilderness, about killing men who tried to hurt her, about finding silver in the mountain that was supposed to be her grave. "I'm ready," she said. "Whatever comes, we'll handle it together." They filed the mining claim the next week, riding to the territorial office in Billings with rock samples and carefully drawn maps. The clerk who processed the paperwork barely glanced at them, just another hopeful prospector couple trying their luck in the mountains. The assayer, though, knew exactly what he was looking at. "This is high-grade ore," he said, examining Evelyn's samples under lamplight. "Very high grade. Where'd you find it?" "Our land," Caleb said flatly. "Already filed the claim." "Smart. This gets out. You'll have half of Montana trying to jump your stake." The assayer made notes in his ledger. "You planning to work it yourselves or sell to a mining company?" "Work it ourselves for now. Going to need equipment, men, capital investment. We'll manage." The assayer looked at Evelyn, seemed to really see her for the first time. "You know anything about mining, ma'am?" "I know geology. I can read surveys and calculate ore quality. I can keep books and manage operations." She met his skeptical gaze steadily. "I can do whatever needs doing." Something in her voice must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. "Then you might actually pull this off. Most people find silver and immediately sell to the first company that makes an offer, end up with pennies on the dollar. You two are thinking long-term, We've survived this long by thinking ahead, Caleb said. Don't plan to stop now. They left Billings with their claim registered, a Sayers report in hand, and a future that suddenly looked very different than either had imagined 6 months ago. On the ride back to Black Ridge, Evelyn couldn't stop smiling. What? Caleb asked. I'm just thinking about my sister, about what she'd say if she could see me now. Probably nothing good. Probably something about how I'll fail, how I'm too stupid and useless to manage a mining operation. Evelyn's smile widened. Which is going to make it so much sweeter when we succeed. When, not if. When, definitely when. She looked at him. You know why? Why? Because we're too stubborn to fail, both of us. We survived winter, survived outlaws, survived everything this mountain threw at us. A silver mine? That's easy compared to what we've already done. Caleb laughed, a real full laugh that Evelyn had only heard a handful of times. I like the way you think, Mrs. Boone. I like that I can think without someone telling me I shouldn't, that I can plan and dream and actually do something with those dreams, instead of just sitting pretty and keeping quiet. You've never been good at sitting pretty and keeping quiet. No, Evelyn agreed. I really haven't. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Smoke rose from the chimney. They'd left the fire banked before departing. The repaired door stood solid and strong. Bess bleated irritably from the barn, demanding her overdue dinner. Home. Their home. And beneath it, literally and figuratively, a fortune waiting to be claimed. Evelyn dismounted and stood for a moment just looking at it all. 6 months ago, she'd arrived here terrified and convinced she was being sent to her death. Instead, she'd found life, purpose, love. And now, apparently, silver. Come on, Caleb said, taking her hand. Let's feed the demon goat before she breaks down the barn door. Tomorrow we can start planning how to extract our fortune from the mountain. Together, Evelyn said. Together, Caleb agreed. And hand in hand, they walked into the cabin that had survived blizzards and bullets, ready to face whatever came next. The wilderness hadn't destroyed Evelyn Harrow. It had forged her into someone unstoppable. And the story was far from over. The first test hole they dug proved Evelyn's instincts right. The silver vein ran deep into the mountain, at least 20 feet down before the rock became too hard to excavate without proper equipment. Caleb hauled up samples while Evelyn documented everything in a leather-bound journal she'd started keeping. Depth measurements, ore quality, estimated yield based on what she'd learned from her father's mining reports. We're going to need help, Caleb said, examining yet another chunk of high-grade ore. Can't dig this out with just the two of us and hand tools. I know. Evelyn wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt. It was late May now, the mountain finally warm enough to work outside without freezing. But who do we trust? Word gets out about how rich this deposit is, we'll have claim jumpers coming out of the woodwork. Dutch, Caleb said immediately. He's honest, knows mining, and he owes me for pulling him out of a cave-in 2 years back. Anyone else? Maybe Tom Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew. He worked railroad construction, knows about moving earth and rock, and there's a blacksmith in Billings named Morrison who could fabricate equipment if we paid him enough to keep quiet. Evelyn made notes. We'll need timber for supports, tools, a sluice system for processing ore, and that's just to start small-scale operations. If we want to really work this claim properly, she did some quick calculations. We're looking at needing at least $1,000 in equipment and labor. Caleb whistled low. That's more than I've made in 5 years of trapping. I know, but the ore we've pulled already? Based on the assayer's estimates, we've got maybe $200 worth just from this test hole. The full vein could be worth tens of thousands, maybe more. The numbers were staggering, terrifying. They were talking about transforming from subsistence mountain dwellers into actual business operators practically overnight. We could take a loan, Evelyn said slowly. Use the assayer's report as collateral. Banks in Billings must deal with mining ventures. Banks also like to take over claims when people can't pay back loans. Seen it happen too many times. Caleb sat on a rock, thinking. What if we worked it slower? Pulled ore ourselves, sold small batches, reinvested the profits into better equipment. Take longer, but we'd own it all outright. That could work. It'd take years instead of months, but we'd avoid debt. Evelyn looked at the exposed vein. silvery gray in the afternoon sun. And honestly, I like the idea of building this ourselves. No investors, no partners trying to take control. Just us. Just us, Caleb agreed, like everything else. They spent the summer establishing a routine that balanced survival with mining. Mornings were for the cabin, tending animals, maintaining the garden, hunting and preserving food. Afternoons, they worked the mine, extracting ore in carefully measured quantities. Evenings, Evelyn kept meticulous records while Caleb maintained their tools. Dutch came up from Black Ridge once they explained the situation, took one look at the exposed vein, and let out a low whistle. Boone, you magnificent bastard. This is the real thing. We know. Question is, can you help us work it without half of Montana finding out? Dutch spat tobacco juice into the dirt. I can keep my mouth shut for a percentage of the take. They negotiated terms right there. Dutch would work the mine 3 days a week in exchange for 10% of the profits from ore he helped extract. It was generous, but Dutch was skilled and trustworthy, which was worth more than gold. More than silver, even. What's your woman doing? Dutch asked, watching Evelyn crawl into the test shaft with a lantern and measuring tape. Surveying. She's got a better head for geology than any prospector I've met. She always like this? Like what? Fearless, competent, completely unconcerned with doing things ladies aren't supposed to do. Dutch grinned. I like her. So do I, Caleb said. That's why I married her. By August, they'd extracted enough ore to make their first sale. Evelyn and Caleb hauled 300 pounds of high-grade silver ore to Billings, sold it through the assayer, and walked away with $800 in cash, more money than Caleb had seen in his entire life. We should celebrate, Evelyn said, staring at the bills in her hands like they might disappear. What kind of celebration? I don't know. Dinner somewhere that isn't our cabin? New tools for the mine? A less demonic goat? Bess heard that and she's offended. Bess can learn to live with my opinions. They compromised. Half the money went immediately into purchasing better mining equipment, proper picks, reinforced shovels, timber for shaft supports, and a small hand-cranked ore crusher. The other half went into a bank account Evelyn opened in both their names, the first time she'd ever had her name on anything financial. Mrs. Evelyn Boone, the bank clerk read from the paperwork. And this is your husband. That's right. You're opening a joint account? Is that a problem? Evelyn kept her voice level, but there was steel underneath. No, ma'am. Just unusual is all. Most men prefer to... Most men aren't married to her, Caleb interrupted. The account is joint. Process the paperwork. They walked out of the bank with a deposit book and the satisfied feeling of having accomplished something real. That night in Mrs. Chen's boarding house, they actually did celebrate. A bottle of decent whiskey, a meal that neither of them cooked, and plans sketched on napkins for expanding the mine. We need a name, Evelyn said, drawing a rough map of their claim. If we're building a real operation, it needs a proper name. The Boone Mine? Boring, lacks vision. The Silver Ridge Mine? Better, but still kind of generic. Evelyn tapped her pencil against the napkin. What about Evelyn's discovery? Caleb raised an eyebrow. You want to name it after yourself? I'm the one who found it. Seems fair. It's on my land claim. Our land claim. We're married, remember? What's yours is mine and what's mine is yours, including mineral rights and naming privileges. She grinned. Besides, can you imagine my sister's face when she hears about Evelyn's discovery making a fortune? The sister she sent west to die? You're vindictive. I appreciate that quality. Caleb raised his whiskey glass. To Evelyn's discovery. May it make us rich enough to buy Bess a friend so she has someone else to torment. To getting rich and annoying my family from 1,000 miles away. They clinked glasses and drank. The mining operation grew through fall and into the next winter. Tom Chen joined them in September, and his railroad experience proved invaluable for building support structures in the expanding shaft. They hired 2 more men from Black Ridge, brothers named Jack and Samuel Worth who'd lost their ranch to bad weather and needed work. You trust them? Evelyn asked Caleb privately. Jack saved my life once. Got between me and a mountain lion when my rifle jammed. I trust him with my life. By extension, I trust Sam. The Worth brothers proved reliable, hard-working, and blessedly incurious about exactly how rich the vein was running. They showed up, did their jobs, took their wages, and kept their mouths shut. By Christmas of their second year together, Evelyn's discovery was producing steadily. They'd extracted over $5,000 worth of silver, reinvested $3,000 into equipment and wages, and banked the rest. The mine shaft now ran 40 feet deep with proper timber supports, ventilation, and a pulley system for hauling ore. Black Ridge was growing too. Word had gotten out, not about their specific claim, but about silver being found in the territory. Prospectors flooded in. The town added a second saloon, a proper hotel, even a schoolhouse in anticipation of families settling. The territory was changing, civilization creeping into the wilderness whether anyone wanted it or not. "You ever regret it?" Evelyn asked one evening. They were in their cabin, expanded now with a proper bedroom addition and a separate room Evelyn used as an office for managing the mine's books. "The quiet life you had before I showed up?" Caleb looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. "You think I had it better alone?" "You had peace, solitude. Now you've got employees to manage, a mine to run, a town full of strangers moving in. Everything changed. Everything changed when I advertised for a wife. I knew that when I did it." He set down the cleaning rod. "I don't regret a single thing, Evelyn. Not the mine, not the responsibility, and definitely not you. Even when I'm being stubborn about the bookkeeping system? Especially then. You arguing about ledger organization is still better than me talking to myself in an empty cabin for 6 years. Spring brought surveyors. The territorial government was finally getting around to properly mapping the region, establishing official boundaries, and confirming land claims. 2 men showed up at their door in April with surveying equipment and bureaucratic authority. "We're here to verify the Boone land claim and associated mineral rights," the older surveyor said, consulting a sheaf of papers. "Should only take a few days to establish boundaries and update the territorial records." Evelyn watched them work with barely concealed anxiety. Their entire future depended on their claim being solid and legal. If there were any irregularities, any questions about boundaries or filing dates? "Stop worrying," Caleb said, finding her pacing outside the mine entrance. "Our claim is legal, filed properly. They're just confirming what we already know. What if someone else filed a competing claim? What if there's some technicality we missed? Then we deal with it. But borrowing trouble before it arrives is just torturing yourself for no reason." The surveyors finished their work a week later. The lead surveyor, a meticulous man named Patterson, spread maps across their kitchen table. "Everything appears to be in order," he said. "Your original land claim is solid, filed properly with the territorial office. The mineral rights addendum was properly registered and predates any competing claims in the area." He pointed to marks on the map. "These are your confirmed boundaries. 200 acres total with mineral rights extending to, well, essentially as deep as you can dig." "No conflicts?" Evelyn pressed. "None. You were smart filing when you did. 3 other prospectors have tried claiming land overlapping your boundaries, but your filing date takes precedence. They'll have to look elsewhere." After they left, Evelyn collapsed into a chair, relief making her lightheaded. "We own it. Actually, legally, completely own it. Told you to stop worrying. I'll worry less when we're successful enough that no one can take it away from us." She pulled out her ledgers, running calculations. "Based on current extraction rates and ore quality, we're looking at maybe $15,000 in silver this year, double what we made last year. If we can maintain that growth, we'll need more men, better equipment, maybe even start thinking about a proper ore processing facility instead of sending everything to Billings. One step at a time. Let's make it through this year first, then plan expansion." But expansion found them anyway. In June, a well-dressed man arrived from Denver representing the Rocky Mountain Mining Corporation. He introduced himself as Richard Thornton, smiled with too many teeth, and offered to buy Evelyn's discovery for $20,000 cash. "That's generous," Evelyn said carefully. They were sitting in the cabin, now furnished with actual chairs instead of stumps, a real table, even curtains on the windows. "What makes you think we want to sell?" "Most prospectors do, ma'am. Mining is hard work, dangerous, and requires constant capital investment. $20,000 would set you up comfortably for life. You could move to a real city, live like civilized people instead of working yourselves to death in the mountains." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he let Evelyn handle the conversation. "Mr. Thornton," she said pleasantly, "I appreciate you traveling all this way, but we're not interested in selling." Perhaps you don't understand how generous this offer is. Most claims never produce $20,000 in total value. We're offering that up front. No risk, no labor required. I understand perfectly. And we're still not selling. Thornton's smile dimmed slightly. I'm authorized to go as high as $25,000 for the right property. That's my final offer. And my final answer is no. Mrs. Boone, be reasonable. You're a woman running a mining operation in frontier territory. That's admirable, truly, but impractical long term. Wouldn't you rather have security, comfort? I have security, I have comfort. What I don't have is any interest in selling my mind to someone who thinks my gender makes me too stupid to understand business. Thornton's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. This territory is becoming competitive. Larger operations will push out small independents. Better to sell now while you can get a good price. Is that a threat, Mr. Thornton? It's business reality, Mrs. Boone. Caleb stood slowly, his sighs filling the cabin. I think you should leave now. Thornton looked at him, seemed to recalculate his approach. Of course, but the offer stands if you change your mind. He placed a card on the table. I'll be at the Black Ridge Hotel for the next week if you come to your senses. After he left, Evelyn threw the business card into the fireplace. $25,000, Caleb said. That's a lot of money. It's insulting. The mine's worth double that at minimum, probably more like $60,000 or $70,000 based on the size of the deposit. Evelyn pulled out her survey maps. He's trying to buy us out cheap before we realize what we're sitting on. You really think it's worth that much? I know it is. I've been mapping the vein extent, estimating total ore volume. Caleb, we're not sitting on a small deposit. This is massive, multiple years of production, maybe decades if we work it right. She looked at him. We could build something real here, not just a mine, an actual company, create jobs, contribute to the territory's growth, build a legacy. You want to be a mining baron? I want to prove that the useless daughter they threw away could build an empire. She smiled. And yes, being rich enough to make my family regret everything sounds pretty good too. Caleb laughed and pulled her into his arms. Then I guess we're building an empire. The next year proved Evelyn's estimates conservative. Production hit $20,000 in extracted silver, then 30, then 40 as they expanded operations. They hired 15 men, built a processing facility that let them refine ore on site, and constructed a proper road from the mine to Black Ridge for hauling equipment and product. Black Ridge transformed around them. The silver boom drew hundreds of prospectors, but Evelyn's discovery remained the largest and most successful operation. Other mines opened, some found decent deposits, most failed within months. The Boones' combination of geological knowledge, careful management, and sheer stubborn work ethic kept them ahead of the competition. Evelyn's discovery became more than just a mine. It became the economic engine of the entire region. The men they employed spent their wages in Black Ridge, supporting merchants and saloons and services. Families moved in, drawn by stable work and growing prosperity. The town got a bank, a newspaper, even a telegraph office. You're famous, Caleb told Evelyn one day, showing her a newspaper article from Denver. The headline read, Frontier Woman Builds Mining Empire. She read it, torn between pride and discomfort. They make it sound like some kind of miracle, like a woman being competent at business is noteworthy. It is noteworthy, not because women can't do it, but because society usually doesn't let them try. Well, society can bite me. That's my wife. By their 4th anniversary, they employed 35 men and had extracted over $250,000 in silver. The cabin had been replaced by a proper house, 2 stories, with a parlor and a real kitchen and bedrooms for the children they were starting to think about having. The mine had expanded into multiple shafts, following different veins through the mountain. Evelyn hired a manager to oversee daily operations, freeing her to focus on business development and expansion planning. They opened an office in Billings to handle ore sales and equipment procurement, started investing in other ventures, a lumber mill, a freight company, even part ownership in the Black Ridge Hotel. We're not mountain hermits anymore, Caleb observed one evening. He'd come in from inspecting the mine, still dusty and tired, but satisfied. No, Evelyn agreed. We're employers, business owners, contributing members of society. She looked at him. You miss it? The simple life? Sometimes. But then I remember how lonely it was. He pulled her close. I'd rather have this, the chaos. The responsibility, you, then all the quiet solitude in the world. The empire they'd built together had a name now. Not just Evelyn's discovery, but the Boone Mining Company, with interests across the territory. They had lawyers handling contracts, accountants managing books, employees they'd never even met working operations they'd acquired. It was overwhelming and exhilarating, and nothing like what either of them had imagined that first winter in a one-room cabin with a demonic goat and hope as their only capital. "You know what's funny?" Evelyn said one night, reviewing quarterly reports in their home office. "What?" 5 years ago, I was the unwanted daughter, the failure, the joke. Now I'm one of the wealthiest women in Montana Territory. She set down the papers. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real." "It's real. You built it. We built it." "No, I built it because you gave me the chance. You could have sent me back when you discovered Clarissa's deception. Could have treated me like the burden everyone else did. Instead, you saw something worth keeping." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You know what I saw that first day, when you stepped off that stage looking terrified?" "What?" "Strength hiding under fear. Capability buried under years of being told you were worthless. I saw someone who'd survive if given half a chance." He smiled. "I was right. We both survived. More than survived. We thrived. Built something neither of us could have managed alone." "Partnership," Evelyn said. "Partnership," Caleb agreed. Outside their window, Black Ridge glittered with lights. No longer a rough frontier settlement, but a real town with a future. The mine works lit the mountainside, running 3 shifts now to keep up with demand. In the distance, the peaks rose dark against the stars, the wilderness that had forged them both still wild and waiting. Evelyn's discovery had given them wealth, but the mountain had given them everything else: strength, purpose, each other. The unwanted daughter had become unstoppable. The lonely mountain man had found his match, and their story was about to take one final turn. Because 3,000 miles away in Charleston, in a mansion slowly crumbling under the weight of failed investments and broken pride, Marcus Harrow was reading that same Denver newspaper article about his eldest daughter's mining empire. And he was making plans. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, delivered by a boy who worked for the Black Ridge Telegraph office. Evelyn was reviewing production reports when Caleb brought it to her office, his expression unreadable. "It's from your father," he said. Evelyn's pen stopped mid-calculation. She hadn't heard from Marcus Harrow in 5 years. Hadn't expected to hear from him ever again. The fact that he was reaching out now couldn't mean anything good. She opened the telegram with hands that wanted to shake, but refused. "Arriving Black Ridge, October 15th, stop. Family matters to discuss, stop your father, stop." "Family matters," Evelyn read aloud. After 5 years of silence, he suddenly has family matters to discuss. "You think he knows about the mine?" "Everyone knows about the mine. We've been in newspapers from Denver to San Francisco." She crumpled the telegram. "He wants something. That's the only reason he'd come. You don't have to see him." "No, I do. I need to face him eventually. Might as well be on my terms, in my territory, with my money backing me up." She looked at Caleb. "Besides, I've been waiting 5 years to show him exactly how wrong he was about me." October 15th came with unseasonable warmth, the kind of false summer that made you forget winter was waiting just around the corner. Evelyn dressed carefully that morning, a proper business suit she'd had tailored in Billings, her hair pinned up, the silver necklace Caleb had made her those first months, now joined by other jewelry that spoke of wealth and success. She wanted her father to see exactly what his unwanted daughter had become. The train from Billings pulled into Black Ridge at noon. Evelyn and Caleb waited on the platform, now a proper station with a roof and benches, not the muddy clearing it had been when Evelyn first arrived. The town spread behind them, 2-story buildings and paved streets replacing the ramshackle frontier settlement of 5 years ago. Marcus Harrow stepped off the train looking diminished. Still tall, still carrying himself with that Charleston aristocrat bearing, but there was something brittle about him now. His suit was expensive, but a few years out of fashion. His shoes were polished, but worn. The confidence that had once seemed unshakable looked like it was held together with pride and desperation. Clarissa emerged behind him. She'd aged badly, her petite prettiness hardening into something pinched and bitter. The expensive dress she wore couldn't hide the fact that it had been altered to fit differently than originally intended, probably let out to accommodate changing circumstances and cheaper food. For a long moment, they all just stared at each other across the platform. 5 years of silence stretched between them like a chasm. Marcus spoke first. "Evelyn, you look well." "I am well. Quite well, actually." Evelyn's voice was steady, calm. "Father, Clarissa, this is my husband, Caleb Boone." Caleb nodded once, his expression giving away nothing, but Evelyn felt his presence beside her like an anchor, solid and unshakable. "The mountain man," Clarissa said, and there was still that edge of mockery in her voice, still that assumption of superiority, despite evidence standing right in front of her. "The mining company owner," Caleb corrected quietly. "Among other things." Marcus's eyes swept the town, clearly calculating, assessing. "You've done remarkably well for yourself, Evelyn. When we heard about your success, we could hardly believe it." "Why are you here?" Evelyn asked bluntly. "You didn't travel 2,000 miles just to congratulate me." "Can we discuss this somewhere private, perhaps over dinner? We can discuss it right here, or at my office. Your choice." Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Surprise, maybe, that his daughter would be so direct. The Evelyn he'd known had been quiet, deferential, eager to avoid confrontation. That Evelyn was long dead. "Very well, your office then." The Boone Mining Company headquarters was a 3-story building on Black Ridge's Main Street, the nicest structure in town. Evelyn's office on the top floor had windows overlooking the entire valley, a massive desk made from Montana pine, and furnishings that spoke of serious business operations. Maps covered one wall showing mine locations and claims. File cabinets held years of meticulously kept records. A safe in the corner contained contracts, deeds, and more money than Marcus Harrow had probably seen in years. Evelyn sat behind her desk. Caleb stood by the window, seemingly relaxed, but positioned where he could see everything. Marcus and Clarissa sat in the visitors' chairs, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "So," Evelyn said, "family matters. Explain." Marcus shifted. "Perhaps we could speak privately? Family business shouldn't—" "Caleb is my family. He stays. Now talk or leave." Marcus's jaw tightened, not used to being given orders by his daughter, not used to being the one without power in the room. "Our investments failed," he said finally. "The railroad stock we'd put everything into collapsed. We lost the Charleston house. Lost nearly everything." "I'm sorry to hear that," Evelyn said, and was surprised to find she actually meant it. Not because she cared about Marcus's comfort, but because financial ruin was painful regardless of who experienced it. "But I'm not sure why that concerns me. Your family, Evelyn. We came to ask for your help." There it was. The real reason for this visit. "Help," Evelyn repeated. "You want money." "We want what's rightfully ours," Clarissa interjected. "This mining fortune, it belongs to the Harrow family. You're a Harrow. That makes it partially ours." Evelyn laughed. Couldn't help it. The audacity was almost impressive. "I'm a Boone now, actually. Have been for 5 years. And this fortune belongs to me and my husband because we built it. With our work, our planning, our risk." "Built on what, though?" Marcus leaned forward. "Your education came from my library. The knowledge you used to identify that silver deposit, where do you think you learned that? Everything you are, everything you've accomplished, you owe to the foundation I provided." "The foundation you provided." Evelyn stood up, her hands flat on the desk. "You mean the library you never wanted me in? The books you told me were inappropriate for women? The education I stole in secret because you certainly weren't going to teach me anything useful? I provided for you for 24 years. You tolerated my existence for 24 years. There's a difference. And the moment Clarissa suggested sending me away as a joke, as punishment, you went along with it. You put me on a train west like I was garbage to be disposed of." "We thought you'd find a simple life out here," Clarissa said. "A mountain wife, modest, quiet. We never imagined, that I'd be successful, that I'd build something real, that I'd prove everything you believed about me was wrong." Evelyn's voice was cold now, all the old hurt crystallizing into something sharp and hard. "You sent me here to fail. To die, probably. The fact that I didn't is despite you, not because of you." Evelyn, please. Marcus's voice took on a wheedling quality that made Evelyn's skin crawl. We're destitute, living in a boarding house in Baltimore. Clarissa's engagement was broken when our fortune disappeared. We have nothing. All we're asking for is a small loan, $20,000. That's nothing to you now. You'd barely notice it missing. You're right. I probably wouldn't notice $20,000 missing from my accounts. Evelyn sat back down, her decision made. But I'm not giving you a single cent. You can't be serious, Clarissa gasped. We're your family. You were my family. Then you treated me like garbage, shipped me west to get rid of me, and didn't send a single letter in 5 years to see if I was even alive. Now you show up wanting money and claiming some kind of blood right to my success? Evelyn shook her head. No. The answer is no. Marcus stood, his face flushing with anger. You're being vindictive, petty. This isn't worthy of you, Evelyn. What's not worthy is coming here with your hand out after spending my entire life telling me I was worthless. You want to know what I learned out here, Father? I learned that I'm worth something, that I'm capable and strong and smart. I learned that the only thing holding me back in Charleston was people like you telling me I couldn't do things I absolutely could do. We made mistakes, Marcus said stiffly. I admit that. We could have treated you better, but surely that doesn't warrant abandoning your family when they need you. You abandoned me first. You don't get to claim family loyalty after you threw me away. Caleb spoke for the first time since they'd entered the office. I think this conversation is over. Marcus turned on him. This doesn't concern you, Mountain Man. This is between me and my daughter. Wrong on both counts. It concerns me because Evelyn is my wife and partner, and she's not your daughter anymore. She's her own person who owes you nothing. Caleb moved away from the window, his size suddenly very apparent in the confined space. You should leave now. The afternoon train back to Billings departs at 4. I suggest you're on it. You can't throw us out, Clarissa said shrilly. Evelyn, tell him. He speaks for both of us. Evelyn stood, moved around the desk to stand beside Caleb. United front, equal partners. You have until sunset to leave Black Ridge. If you're still here after that, I'll have Sheriff Pike escort you to the territorial border. You'd do that? Marcus's voice was incredulous. You'd have your own father arrested? I'd have 2 people who mean nothing to me removed from my town for harassment. Yes, without hesitation. Marcus stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. The woman standing in front of him bore no resemblance to the frightened, desperate girl he'd sent west 5 years ago. You've become hard, he said finally. Cruel. No, I've become strong. There's a difference. Evelyn walked to the office door, held it open. Goodbye, Father. Goodbye, Clarissa. Don't come back. They left, Marcus moving stiffly, Clarissa shooting poisonous looks over her shoulder. Evelyn watched them go down the stairs, out of the building, into the street below. Watched them walk toward the hotel, 2 diminished figures in a town they didn't understand, trying to claim pieces of a life they'd tried to destroy. When they were gone, when the door was closed and locked, Evelyn sat down in her chair and discovered her hands were shaking. Caleb knelt beside her. You all right? I don't know. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I just feel tired. You did the right thing. Did I? They're family. They're struggling. Maybe I should have... No. Caleb's voice was firm. They made their choices. They treated you like you were worthless, then expected you to rescue them when they failed. That's not how family works. Real family, the kind that matters, supports each other, builds each other up. They never did that for you. You did, though, from the very first day. Because I saw who you actually were, not who they told you to be. He took her hands, stilled their trembling. You're not cruel for protecting yourself from people who hurt you. You're smart. Evelyn leaned forward, rested her forehead against his. Thank you for being here, for being exactly who you are. Where else would I be? They stayed like that for a long moment. 2 people who'd built something real from nothing, who'd proven that worth wasn't determined by society's expectations or family's limitations. Outside the window, Black Ridge bustled with activity. Miners changed shifts, merchants closed shops, families walked home for dinner. The town they'd helped build, the life they'd created together, continued without pause. That evening, Evelyn and Caleb stood on their front porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The house behind them was warm and lit and full of life. The mine in the distance was quiet for the night, but would roar back to life with tomorrow's first shift. Everything they'd built together spread out around them, tangible, real, theirs. "You know what's strange?" Evelyn said. "When I first came here, I thought the wilderness would destroy me. That I'd die in these mountains, or at least lose myself trying to survive them. What changed? I realized the wilderness didn't want to destroy me. It just didn't care. It was completely indifferent to who I was supposed to be or what society expected. That indifference was freedom. Out here, I could be anything I was strong enough to become." Caleb pulled her close. "And what did you become?" "Someone who doesn't need validation from people who never valued me. Someone who knows her worth because she proved it, not because someone else told her." She looked up at him. "Someone happy. You deserve happiness, deserve everything you've built. We built it, together. That's what matters." She turned to face him fully. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. The mine, the company, becoming who I am now. None of it happens if you'd sent me away that first day. If you'd believed Clarissa's letter instead of giving me a chance. I gave you a chance. You did everything else yourself. We gave each other chances. That's what partnership means." They stood together as darkness settled over the valley, as stars began appearing in the enormous Montana sky. Somewhere down in Black Ridge, the afternoon train pulled out of the station carrying Marcus and Clarissa Harrow back east, back to whatever life they'd cobbled together from the wreckage of their pride and poor choices. Evelyn didn't watch them go, didn't waste energy on people who'd wasted years of her life. Instead, she looked at the future, at the mine that would continue producing, at the town that would keep growing, at the mountains that had forged her into something unbreakable, at the man beside her who'd seen potential where everyone else saw failure. "What do you want to do tomorrow?" Caleb asked. "Same thing we do every day. Work the mine, build the business, prove everyone wrong who said we couldn't do this." "Sounds perfect." The next morning, Evelyn was in her office early reviewing production reports when her manager, a competent man named Harrison, knocked on the door. "Mrs. Boone? There's someone here to see you. Says she's from the Women's Business Association in Denver." A well-dressed woman in her 40s entered, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Boone, I'm Catherine Wells. I hope I'm not intruding, but I've been following your success for some time, and I wanted to meet you personally." "Following my success?" "You're one of the most successful female business owners in the Western Territories. Your mining operation employs dozens of men, generates substantial revenue, and from what I understand, you run it yourself rather than simply being the wife who inherited it." "I discovered the silver deposit, planned the mine, built the company from nothing." Evelyn gestured to a chair. "My husband and I are equal partners, but yes, I handle most of the business operations." Catherine smiled. "That's exactly why I'm here. There are women across the country trying to break into business, trying to prove we're capable of more than running households. But we lack examples, role models, proof that it can be done. You're that proof, Mrs. Boone." "I'm just trying to run a successful company." "You're doing more than that. You're changing what people think is possible for women." Catherine pulled papers from her portfolio. "I'd like to interview you for a series of articles about successful businesswomen. Share your story, how you started, how you overcame obstacles, what advice you'd give to other women." Evelyn hesitated. Public attention made her uncomfortable, but she thought about all the years she'd been told she couldn't do things, that her strength and intelligence were liabilities rather than assets. Thought about other women being told the same lies. "All right," she said. "What do you want to know?" The interview took most of the morning. Catherine was thorough, intelligent, asking questions about geology and mining operations and business strategy rather than focusing on Evelyn's appearance or domestic life. It was refreshing to be taken seriously as a business person rather than treated as a curiosity. "One final question," Catherine said as they wrapped up. "What would you say to young women who are told they're not capable of business or leadership?" Evelyn thought carefully. "I'd say that other people's limitations aren't yours. Just because someone can't imagine you succeeding doesn't mean you can't do it. Find people who believe in your potential, work harder than anyone expects, and prove the doubters wrong. Not because you need their validation, but because you deserve the life you want to build." Catherine looked up from her notes. "That's powerful. Mind if I use that as the closing quote?" Use whatever helps. After Catherine left, Evelyn sat at her desk feeling strange. She'd spent so much of her life being invisible, being dismissed. Now someone wanted to write articles about her success, hold her up as an example. It was disorienting and oddly satisfying all at once. Caleb found her there an hour later, staring out the window at the mountains. Harrison said you had a visitor. A journalist from Denver wants to write about successful businesswomen. Evelyn turned to face him. Is that strange? That people care about what I've accomplished? Not strange. Deserved. You've done remarkable things, Evelyn. We've done remarkable things. I helped, but the vision, the drive, the brains behind this whole operation, that's you. I'm just the mountain man who was smart enough to recognize potential when I saw it. You're more than that, and you know it. Maybe, but this moment, this success, you've earned every bit of it. He moved to stand beside her at the window. Your father was wrong. Your sister was wrong. Everyone who dismissed you was wrong. And now the whole territory knows it. 2 weeks later, Catherine's article appeared in the Denver Post. Evelyn read it over breakfast, embarrassed by the glowing description, but unable to deny the facts. She had built something significant. She had proven that women could succeed in business despite every obstacle society placed in their way. Listen to this, she said to Caleb. She writes, Mrs. Evelyn Boone represents a new breed of Western woman, educated, capable, and unafraid to compete in industries traditionally dominated by men. Her success challenges our assumptions about women's capabilities and points toward a future where talent matters more than gender. She's not wrong. It feels strange. Being held up as some kind of pioneer, I was just trying to survive, then trying to build a life, then trying to build a business. That's what pioneers do. They forge ahead doing what needs doing, and later people call it revolutionary. Caleb refilled her coffee. You comfortable with that role? Comfortable? No. But if my success helps other women believe they can do things they're told they can't, I suppose that's worthwhile. Over the following months, more journalists came. More articles were written. Evelyn's discovery became famous not just as a successful mind, but as an example of what women could accomplish when given opportunity. Letters arrived from young women across the country asking for advice, sharing their own dreams of business and independence. Evelyn answered every letter personally, usually late at night after the day's business was finished. She shared practical advice about bookkeeping and contracts, but also about standing firm against people who underestimated you, about finding partners who valued your capabilities, about building something you could be proud of. You've become an inspiration, Caleb observed one evening, watching her work through a stack of correspondence. I've become busy, Evelyn corrected. Running a mining company and accidentally becoming a symbol is exhausting. Want to stop? No, these letters matter. These women matter. She set down her pen. I wish someone had written to me when I was 24 and convinced I was useless. Just one person saying you're capable, you have value, don't let them define you. It might have changed everything. You're being that person for them now. Trying to be, anyway. Years continued passing. The mine produced steadily. The company expanded into other ventures. Black Ridge became a proper city with schools and churches and civic organizations. Evelyn and Caleb's house filled with children, 3 of them eventually, 2 girls and a boy, all of them learning that strength mattered more than gender, that capability trumped convention. They taught their daughters to read geological surveys alongside their needlework, taught their son that partnership meant equality, that the strongest marriages were built on mutual respect, raised all of them to question limitations and forge their own paths. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb and Evelyn rode up to the ridge where she'd first discovered silver. The mine stretched below them now, a proper operation with multiple shafts and processing facilities. But this spot remained wild, unchanged, except for the memories it held. You ever miss the simple life? Evelyn asked. Just the 2 of us in a one-room cabin with a demon goat? Bess is still a demon. She just has a bigger barn to terrorize now. Caleb dismounted, helped Evelyn down. But yeah, sometimes I miss it. The quiet. The simplicity. Me too. Though I don't miss the terror, or thinking I was going to die every time you left for a few days. You were never going to die. Too stubborn. I prefer determined. They stood looking out over the valley at everything they'd built together. The mine, the company, the town, the family. A life neither could have imagined that first desperate winter. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Evelyn asked. "Developing the mine, building the company, changing everything? We could have just worked it small, kept it simple. We could have. But that's not who you are. You were never going to be content with simple survival when you could build an empire." Caleb turned her to face him. "And I love that about you. Your ambition, your drive, your refusal to accept limitations. Even when it's inconvenient. Especially then." Evelyn kissed him. 10 years of partnership and love and shared struggle condensed into one moment. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "I'm thinking about Clarissa's letter, the one she pinned to my coat, about how she sent me here expecting me to fail and die. About how satisfying it is that she was so completely wrong. Still vindictive after all these years?" "Absolutely. Some grudges are worth keeping." She laughed. "But also thinking about how the worst thing that ever happened to me, being sent away, being treated like garbage, turned into the best thing. How rock bottom became foundation. The wilderness didn't destroy you. No, it forged me into someone unstoppable. Someone who knows exactly what she's worth because she proved it." She took his hand. "Someone who found an actual partner, instead of just someone who tolerated her existence." They rode back down the mountain as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The mine would keep producing. The company would keep growing. Their children would grow up in a world where a woman running a successful business was notable but not impossible. And somewhere far away in Baltimore, in a cramped boarding house room, Marcus and Clarissa Harrow were probably still bitter about the fortune they'd tried to claim, still convinced they'd been wronged by the daughter they'd thrown away. Evelyn didn't waste energy caring what they thought. She had better things to do, a company to run, a family to raise, a legacy to build that had nothing to do with the people who'd tried to bury her. That night, tucked into bed in the house they'd built together, Caleb asked one more question. "Any regrets? About how things turned out?" Evelyn thought about Charleston, about the girl she'd been, frightened, dismissed, convinced of her own worthlessness. Thought about the journey west, the terror and desperation. Thought about that first winter in the cabin, learning to survive, learning to be strong. Thought about everything that had come after, the mine, the company, the success that proved every doubt wrong, the children sleeping down the hall, the man beside her who'd seen potential where everyone else saw failure, the life she'd built from nothing but stubborn determination and geological knowledge stolen from her father's library. "No regrets," she said, "not a single one. Being sent away was the best thing that ever happened to me. It gave me the chance to become who I actually was, instead of who they told me to be." And who's that? Someone unstoppable, someone who built an empire from a silver vein in sheer spite. Someone happy. Caleb pulled her close. "I like who you became." "So do I, finally." Outside their window, the Montana mountains stood eternal and indifferent, having witnessed one more person forge themselves into something stronger than the world expected. The wilderness had tested Evelyn Harrow and found her unbreakable. Not because she was perfect or fearless or always right, but because she refused to let other people's limitations define her potential. She'd been sent west as punishment and turned it into triumph, been called worthless and built worth, been disposed of like garbage and created something valuable enough that the people who threw her away came crawling back. The unwanted daughter had become unstoppable, and she'd done it by embracing exactly who she was, strong, capable, determined, and absolutely unwilling to accept anyone's narrative about her life except her own. That was the real discovery. Not the silver in the mountain, but the strength in herself. The knowledge that worth wasn't given by others, but claimed through action, proven through accomplishment, solidified through refusing to break when the world expected you to shatter. Evelyn Boone fell asleep wrapped in warmth and certainty, her hand in her husband's, her children safe down the hall, her empire waiting for tomorrow's work. The girl who'd stepped off a train 5 years ago would barely recognize the woman she'd become. But that girl would be proud. And that, Evelyn thought, as sleep claimed her, mattered more than all the silver in Montana.